Hey everyone, welcome back to Goofy Harry. Get ready for an amazing tale. What if Obi-Wan Kenobi discovered baby Harry and raised him as a Jedi of the old Republic? Smash that like button and subscribe for more. Here we go. Chapter 1. The space between stars. The twin suns had already sunk below the Jundland wastes by the time Obi-Wan Kenobi felt it. He was sitting cross-legged on the stone floor of his hut, hands resting on his knees, eyes closed, doing what he did most evenings now, listening. Not for anything in particular. Just listening to the Force the way an old man listens to the sea, finding a kind of bitter comfort in the sound of something vast and indifferent continuing on without him. The desert around him was cooling fast. He could hear the sand settling outside, the distant screech of a Tuscan nightbird, the way the wind moved through the canyon below as though the rocks were breathing. He had been doing this for 3 years. 3 years since Mustafar, since the lava and the screaming. Since he had knelt on a black shore with a man he loved more than any living thing, and watched him become something that deserved to die and couldn't. 3 years since he had placed a baby boy in the arms of a moisture farmer's wife and walked away. He breathed. He let the grief sit where it always sat, low and heavy in his chest, and he did not fight it. Yoda had told him in those last terrible weeks that grief was not the enemy. The clinging is the enemy, Obi-Wan. Grieve, but do not cling. Easy words from a being 800 years old who had never, as far as Obi-Wan could tell, loved anyone the way Obi-Wan had loved Anakin Skywalker. But he breathed anyway. He listened. He kept watch on a farm 4 miles north of his hut, stretching his awareness toward it every night like pressing a bruise, and every night the Force confirmed the same thing. The boy was safe. The boy was sleeping. The boy did not yet know what he carried. Tonight the Force said something different. It started as a sound that wasn't a sound. Something below hearing, below sensation, more like the feeling you get standing at the edge of a very tall drop, that sudden, vertiginous awareness that the ground is a great deal further away than you thought. Obi-Wan opened his eyes. The inside of his hut was dark. The single oil lamp he kept on the rough table had burned low. Everything was exactly as it should be, except that the air in the center of the room had taken on a quality he had no word for, a texture, like the moment before a lightsaber ignites, that half instant of held breath, multiplied by something that made his teeth ache. He was on his feet before he consciously decided to stand. The Force pulled, not gently, not the way it guided a hand or suggested a direction. It pulled the way a current pulls, insistent, committed, entirely unconcerned with his opinion on the matter. He had felt this once before, very briefly, during the last days of the Clone Wars, when Master Yoda had spoken of doorways between the living and cosmic force. He had not fully understood it then. He understood it less now. "What?" Obi-Wan said quietly to the empty room, because talking to himself had become something of a habit. "Are you trying to tell me?" The air in the center of the hut peeled open. There was no other way to describe it. It didn't explode or crack or burn. It simply separated, the way fabric parts when you put your hand through it, and on the other side of that separation was not the interior of his hut continuing on. It was darkness shot through with an uneasy green light, and past that darkness there was something else. A glimpse so brief he almost doubted it. Stone walls, pale and broken, cold British air, smoke, and the particular quality of light that comes from a fire that has already gone out. And underneath all of it, beneath the visual and the cold and the smell of something ancient and recently destroyed, the Force was doing something he had not heard it do since Naboo, since a dark doorway and a young Qui-Gon Jinn and a moment of pure awful possibility. It was crying, not literally. The Force didn't weep. But there was a resonance in it that he could only call grief, vast, raw, staggering grief, the kind that moves the world on its axis. A death, not one death, several deaths layered on each other like sediment, old grief under new grief, a woman's love compressed into something so dense it had become almost architectural, still holding its shape after the person who built it was gone. And inside all of that, like a candle inside a cathedral, something small and warm and furiously, defiantly alive. Obi-Wan stepped through. The transition was not pleasant. It was like being wrung out, his whole body compressed to a point and then released, and he arrived on the other side gasping, one hand on the rough wall of a corridor to steady himself, his robe trailing dust. He straightened immediately. Old Jedi habits. Never let them see you stagger, though there was no one here to see anything. He was standing in the entrance hall of a house that had been half destroyed. The wall to his left was simply gone, blasted outward, the rubble of it scattered across a frost-hardened garden where it mixed with the fallen leaves of November. Cold air poured in through the gap. Above him, rafters were visible, cracked and scorched, open to a sky that was heavy and dark and very, very far from Tatooine. Rain had begun at some point and then stopped, and now everything gleamed with it, the broken stone and the crushed plaster and the leaves and he stopped. There was a woman on the floor, he knew before he crossed the room. The Force had a quality around the very recently dead that he had learned, horribly, to recognize, that specific silence, the absence of a presence that had been there so recently it had left an impression in the air, like a warm handprint on cold glass. She was young. Red-haired, slight, wearing plain clothes with no armor, no weapon, nothing at all that marked her as someone who had faced down whatever had come here tonight. Her eyes were open and green and without any light in them. She had died in this doorway. She had put herself between something and something else, and the something else was Obi-Wan moved. He was through the doorway and up the stairs without deciding to climb them, following the pull of that small warm presence like a beacon, the Force singing around it in a frequency he had never encountered. Magic, he thought, with a kind of distant academic wonder, actual magic, not the Force as he understood it, something both parallel and interwoven with it, something impossibly old, and then he was in the room. It had been a nursery. Once. The crib was intact despite everything. There was something almost deliberate about that, the way the destruction had organized itself around the crib like water around a stone. The wall behind it was scorched black. The ceiling had cracked. Plaster dust lay over everything like snow. In the crib, sitting upright with both hands wrapped around the top rail, staring at Obi-Wan with enormous green eyes, his mother's eyes, he registered distantly, the exact same color as the woman on the floor was a baby, maybe a year old, dark hair that went in every direction. Round face that had been, very recently, tear-stained, and was now mostly just stunned, the particular expression of a child who has been crying so hard it ran out of crying and landed somewhere on the other side of it, wide-eyed and waiting. On his forehead, livid against pale skin, was a lightning bolt scar so fresh it was still slightly raised. Obi-Wan looked at the scar, he looked at the child, he looked at the obliterated wall, and the way the destruction carved a perfect outline around the crib as though something had hit this room with enough force to bring down a cruiser, and this child had simply declined to be harmed by it. Well, Obi-Wan said softly. The baby looked at him. The Force moved around the child the way it moves around things that have just been through something profound. A hum, a settling, like after an earthquake when the ground is still deciding if it's done. And underneath the magic frequency, underneath the grief resonance of the woman downstairs, underneath all of it, there it was, a Force sensitivity so sharp and so clean that it made Obi-Wan's chest constrict. He had felt this once before, twice if he counted Anakin, and he had spent 3 years trying not to count Anakin. "What happened to you tonight?" he asked. He kept his voice low, and even the way he had spoken to young clones who had seen too much, the way he had spoken to Padme in her last hour. Calm, present, "I am here, I am not leaving." The baby made a sound, not a word, too young for words, but not simply a noise either. It was directed, pointed, even. Complaint and a question, and possibly an accusation all at once. "I know," Obi-Wan said. "I'm sorry I wasn't faster." He reached into the crib. The child, remarkably, did not flinch, just watched him with those green eyes, tracking his hands with a focus that no infant should have had, that was purely and entirely the Force paying attention through a pair of borrowed eyes. Obi-Wan lifted him carefully, settled him against his shoulder. The moment he did, the nursery went quiet in a way it hadn't been. Not the silence of emptiness, the silence of something finding what it needed. The baby grabbed a fistful of Obi-Wan's robe and held on. He stood there for a long moment in that ruined room, on a planet he had never visited, in a universe he hadn't known existed until 11 minutes ago, with a child tucked against his shoulder and the Force humming around them, both with a quality he could only call inevitable. "Right," Obi-Wan said. He found a bag. He found warm clothes for the child. Someone had packed them carefully, neatly, in a drawer that had survived the explosion, and he dressed the baby with more patience than he'd expected to have, given that the child seemed to treat the process as an athletic event. He found a photograph on the smashed shelf and paused over it, a young man with dark hair and round glasses, laughing, his arm around a red-haired woman who was laughing too, both alive in the photograph. Not a hollow, a flat, fixed image, but there was life in it that made looking at it briefly unbearable. He placed it carefully in the bag. He went back downstairs. He stood over the woman for a moment. She had a name. He could feel the shape of it somehow, here in this house that had loved her, this house that was still resonating with what she'd done, and though he didn't know it yet, he stood over her the way he would stand over someone he knew, and he said quietly, "I will take care of him." He meant it. He was not certain it was the right thing. He was not certain of much. But he meant it with everything he had, and the Force, for the first time in 3 years, did not feel empty when he said something that mattered. The baby had gone very still on his shoulder, facing the doorway where the woman lay, and Obi-Wan felt a grief move through the child that was too big for something so small, a grief he could not possibly understand but was having anyway, the Force carrying it for him until he was old enough to carry it himself. Obi-Wan tightened his hold. "I've got you," he said. "Come on." He walked back through the house, through the missing wall, across the garden in the cold November air. There was a village nearby. He could see lights, the sound of something like music from a pub, ordinary human life continuing with no idea what had just happened in this house. He turned away from it. He found the door back. The Force had held it, barely a shimmer of altered air beside the ruined garden gate, patient as a tide. He looked at it and felt the familiar nausea of passage waiting on the other side. "This is going to be unpleasant for a moment," he told the baby. The baby made a sound that suggested it had already had a fairly unpleasant evening and was prepared to endure further. "Fair enough," Obi-Wan said and stepped through. He arrived back in his hut gasping and immediately sat down on the floor because his legs had made a unilateral decision. The baby, unperturbed, was investigating his beard with the focused intensity of a scientist running an experiment. The oil lamp had burned out entirely while he'd been gone, and the only light now was the cold starlight through the single window, Tatooine's sky, endless and overfamiliar, the stars he had navigated by for 30 years looking exactly the same as they always had, entirely indifferent to the fact that he had just stepped through the boundary between one reality and another. "All right," Obi-Wan said. To himself, to the child, to the Force, he wasn't entirely sure. All right. He sat there for a while on the cold floor with the baby settled in his lap, both of them breathing, and he did what Qui-Gon had taught him. He simply allowed the present moment to be exactly what it was without immediately trying to transform it into a problem he could solve. It was a skill he had never been particularly gifted at. Qui-Gon had been serenely present in any given moment. Obi-Wan's mind had always been 6 steps ahead, running contingencies, calculating odds. But he had had 3 years to practice, and the present moment had never been this specific, this tangible, this warm. The child's Force presence was remarkable. Sitting with it was like sitting in a patch of sunlight. It wasn't just powerful, it was open, unguarded and unself-conscious in the way that only very young children and very old masters managed to be. There was grief in it and confusion, and the echo of trauma from tonight that would settle into memory, and then eventually into something deeper and less accessible. But underneath all of that there was something simply extraordinary, a brightness, a readiness, a quality he could only call eagerness. As though even now, even hours after the world had broken open, this small person was ready for whatever came next. Anakin had had something like that. Anakin's Force presence had been ablaze, all heat and brightness, almost painful to sit near. This was different. This was a star that had not yet decided what kind of star it wanted to be. "You are going to be remarkable," Obi-Wan said softly. "Not a prediction, an observation. Entirely too much trouble, I suspect." The baby looked up at him, grabbed his beard again. "Yes, all right," he winced. "We will need to establish certain rules." He got up. He found the one candle he kept in the cupboard for emergencies and lit it with a touch of the Force, mostly because his hands were full. He found the last of his Nuna bread and ate half of it mechanically, standing at the table, because it occurred to him that he had not eaten since the evening before, and fainting was not currently useful. He found, after a longer search than he'd like to admit, that he had nothing remotely appropriate for an infant, no milk, no food, nothing soft to sleep on except his own robe folded twice. "Right," he said. "Tomorrow, then, first light." He cleared his cot, arranged the folded robe as padding, and placed the child on it with the same careful deliberateness he had used for everything tonight. The baby lay on its back, watching the candlelight with those eyes that didn't miss anything, and Obi-Wan sat on the floor beside the cot with his back against the wall, and his knees drawn up and the candle on the stone beside him, and he looked at the photograph he'd brought back, the dark-haired man and the red-haired woman, laughing, impossibly young, impossibly alive. He didn't know who they were. He didn't know the child's name. He didn't know what had come to that house tonight or why, or whether it was finished, or what it would mean for a child to carry a scar like that. He knew almost nothing. What he knew was this: the Force had pulled him across the boundary between worlds with a specificity and an urgency that he had not felt since it had placed a 9-year-old boy in his path on a desert planet and quietly insisted. And Obi-Wan had learned the worst way, the only way that really teaches, what happened when he second-guessed that. He was not going to second-guess it again. "What's your name?" he asked the baby. The baby made a sound. The candle flickered. Outside, the desert settled into its deep night cold, and the stars were very bright. He found out the name 3 days later, entirely by accident. He had made the trip to the Lars homestead on the second morning, not to Owen, who would have looked at the infant and made exactly the face Owen always made at anything that complicated his life, and would have been right to make it, but to Beru, who was quieter and sharper, and who asked no questions when Obi-Wan appeared at the kitchen door at sunrise with an infant on his hip, and a look on his face that she must have recognized as "don't make this more complicated than it needs to be." She had simply said, "Come in then," and found milk and a cloth and a proper blanket, and had looked at the child for a long moment with an expression Obi-Wan couldn't entirely read, and then looked at him with an expression he could read perfectly. "He's not from here," she said. He's not." She glanced toward the door, through which Owen was audible somewhere in the outer building, wrestling with a vaporator like Luke. "He is, actually. In some ways he's quite different." Obi-Wan paused. "He's both things. It's not something I entirely understand yet." Beru looked at the child again. The child looked back at her with that same considering focus. After a moment, the child made an exploratory sound in her direction, and she smiled despite herself, the kind of smile people couldn't help when something small and new decided to pay attention to them. "Where did he come from?" "I don't know precisely. Somewhere the Force wanted me to be." He settled onto the bench across the table from her. "I'm going to keep him." The silence that followed was not the silence of judgment. It was the silence of someone rearranging a great deal of information very quickly. "Owen will say, I know what Owen will say. Owen will say it twice and then accept it because he has met me before and he knows this sort of conversation has only one outcome." He paused. "I would appreciate it if you didn't mention this to—" "I know," she said quietly. "I know." She tucked the blanket around the baby with a practiced efficiency that he envied. "Does he have a name?" "I haven't been able to find out." Beru looked at the bag he'd brought back, the one he'd found in the nursery, and nodded toward it. "Did you look through that?" He had looked through it. He had found the clothes, the photograph, a small carved wooden toy, and a folded piece of paper that he had assumed was a note from whoever had packed the bag and therefore hadn't read, respecting the privacy of people who were not present to grant permission, which was a habit so deeply ingrained from years of Jedi protocol that it had apparently survived the end of the Jedi Order. Beru gave him a look that was fond and exasperated in equal measure, which was a look that people who spent time around him eventually developed. He read the note. It was a letter. It was from a woman named Lily Evans Potter. He felt the name land, felt it connect to the red-haired woman on the floor and to the photograph and to the green eyes, and it was addressed to her son, and it was the kind of letter that people write when they are not sure they will be there to say these things in person. It had been written recently. The ink was dark and clear. "Harry James Potter," it began. "In case I'm not here to tell you myself," he read it once. He folded it back along its creases with hands that were steady, because he was a Jedi Master, and he had practice at keeping his hands steady when the rest of him was doing something else entirely. He placed it back in the bag. He looked at the baby. "Harry," he said. The baby's head turned toward his voice with an immediacy that meant the word was already familiar, already home. "Harry Potter," Obi-Wan said, and the child made the sound that meant yes, that exactly that, and outside the twin suns were climbing the sky, and the desert was vast and ancient and entirely indifferent to the fact that the last Jedi Master and the boy who should have grown up to be the boy who lived were sitting in a moisture farmer's kitchen, beginning something that neither of them had any framework to describe. Beru watched all of this. She had remarkable instincts, Beru Lars. She said nothing. In the weeks that followed, Obi-Wan's life changed in ways that were both profound and deeply, almost comically practical. He extended his hut. He had been a general, a diplomat, a shadow council member, and an operative in so many conflicts across so many worlds that the architectural challenge of adding a room to a stone desert dwelling should have been trivial. It was in fact the most difficult project he had undertaken in 3 years, not because of any technical obstacle, but because every time he laid stone the baby was sitting 6 feet away watching him with those terrible attentive eyes, and he became very aware that he was doing this for reasons that the Jedi Code had complicated, principled things to say about, and that he did not care even slightly. He attached. He was attaching. He had attached. All 3 tenses felt equally accurate. Qui-Gon would have found this very funny. Qui-Gon would have said something infuriatingly serene about the living force and the way it didn't trouble itself with rules, and Obi-Wan would have argued, and they would have had the argument they'd had 100 times, and Qui-Gon would have been right again, and the thought of it made Obi-Wan press his hands flat against the stone wall for a moment and breathe. "You're very quiet today," he said, over his shoulder. Harry, at this point approximately 4 months into his life on Tatooine, was sitting in the small space Obi-Wan had cleared for him beside the wall, playing with the wooden toy from his bag. He had recently discovered that if he wanted something to move across the floor, he could want it to move and it would, and he had spent the last 3 days conducting a private research program into the implications of this. Currently the toy was orbiting him in a slow, slightly wobbly ellipse, and Harry was supervising it with the expression of someone who had expected this outcome and was not surprised by it but is still pleased. "That's better," Obi-Wan said. "Smaller circles." The orbit tightened. Harry's expression intensified slightly. Good. This was not, technically, the proper method for introducing a child to the Force. There was a proper method. Obi-Wan had learned it, had taught it, had refined it over years. It involved certain exercises, certain breathing techniques, a careful structured progression from awareness to sensitivity to control. He knew all of it. He had almost immediately abandoned it in favor of what Qui-Gon had actually done, which was to follow the child's instincts rather than impose his own framework, and to be present when something interesting happened, and to say good when something went well, and to say try again when it didn't. This was not teaching. Or it was the only kind that actually worked, and the difference was philosophical, and it was 4 months into single parenthood on a desert planet, and he did not have the energy for philosophy. The toy completed its orbit and bumped gently into Harry's knee. Harry picked it up, looked at it, put it down again, and looked at Obi-Wan. "Again," Obi-Wan said. The toy rose. He watched it rise and felt the Force move through the child like light through water, effortless, unstudied, purely itself, and thought about the letter. Harry James Potter, the boy who had absorbed a killing curse and reflected it back through nothing but his mother's love. The boy who carried magic and the Force in the same breath. The boy who should, by every account Obi-Wan could piece together from the resonance of the world he'd passed through, have been left on a doorstep for people who didn't understand what they had, who would have loved him, probably, in their way, but would have loved him into being small and frightened and unaware of his own nature. And he thought about a 9-year-old boy who had been found too late and taught in the wrong way and loved in a form that couldn't survive what love actually demands. He was not going to make the same mistake, any of the same mistakes. "I should tell you some things," he said. Harry was not old enough for words. He was barely old enough for the concept of words. But he was listening. The Force made that clear, the quality of his attention. "Your mother's name was Lily. She was, from what I can determine, extraordinarily gifted and entirely committed to protecting you. The letter she wrote you is in the bag, and when you're old enough to read I'll give it to you, and I want you to know that what she did on the night I found you was," he stopped, searched for the word. "It was the bravest thing I have ever witnessed, and I was present at the siege of Mandalore, so the bar is not low." The toy drifted. Harry was watching his face. "Your father's name was James. I know less about him. The photograph suggests he was the sort of person who smiled easily, which is a quality I have historically undervalued and intend to do better about." A pause. "You have his hair. I'm told, from vast experience with impractical hair, that this is simply a thing you will have to accept." He went back to the wall, pressed another stone into the join, checked the level. "My name is Obi-Wan Kenobi. I was a Jedi Knight, and then a Jedi Master, and then for a period I was a general in an army that was being controlled by the enemy the entire time, which is exactly as embarrassing as it sounds. I made significant mistakes. I failed people I was responsible for, and the cost of those failures is, well," he didn't say it, he didn't need to. The desert outside said it for him, the empty desert and the distant farm and the small boy asleep in it every night whose Force sensitivity he watched over like a flame in the wind, the last ember of everything that had burned. "But I am here now, and you are here, and the Force it doesn't explain itself, you'll find. It simply arranges things and expects you to deal with the consequences." He looked at Harry over his shoulder. "I intend to teach you everything I know. That is both a promise and a warning." Harry considered this gravely. Then he pointed at the stone wall, and the toy rose again, and the morning light came through the low window and caught the dust in the air and turned it gold. Owen Lars came, eventually. He always came eventually. It was one of his defining characteristics, this willingness to confront things he'd prefer to avoid, executed with the exact minimum delay he could justify. He stood in Obi-Wan's doorway, which was now a proper doorway, the new room visible behind Obi-Wan, and he looked at the child sitting on the floor, and his face did the thing Obi-Wan had predicted. "No," Owen said. "Good morning, Owen. I'm not doing this again. You're not being asked to do anything." "You brought another one." He pointed at Harry, who had looked up at the pointing finger with interest and was now watching Owen the way he watched everything, with complete attention and no self-consciousness whatsoever. You brought another, look at him, look at those eyes, he's not from here. He is now. Owen made a sound that was not a word. He looked at Harry. Harry looked at him. The Force moved between them in the way it did when Harry was assessing something new, and Owen, who had no Force sensitivity, still seemed to feel it, because something in his expression shifted, went uncertain. You're not going to take him somewhere safe, Owen said. Somewhere off this rock. Here is where he's safe, Obi-Wan said. Here is where I can teach him. You said the same thing about, I know what I said. He kept his voice level. This is different. How? Obi-Wan looked at Harry. The child had gone back to the toy, apparently having completed his assessment of Owen and filed it. Because I know better now, he said quietly. Because the first time I had a set of rules that I believed in absolutely, and the rules weren't wrong exactly, but my application of them was. And this time I don't intend to apply them the same way. Owen was quiet for a long moment. Then, Beru said you'd been feeding him. Beru has been extremely helpful. Beru thinks he's. Owen stopped. She said there was something about him. There's a great deal about him. Owen looked at the child one more time, the extended look of a man doing reluctant arithmetic. You're going to train him. Yes, like you train the other one. Not like I trained the other one. Number, he meant it. He felt it settle in him as he said it. The difference, the resolution, the thing he had been moving toward since he stepped through a torn piece of sky into a broken house and found a boy alive in the rubble. I'm going to teach Harry Potter everything the Order taught me, and everything the Order refused to teach me, and everything I've learned in the years since I stopped being what the Order made me, all of it, without qualification. Owen stared at him for a very long time. Then he said, Luke can never know. Luke will know eventually, but not yet, you're right about that. And this, Owen gestured vaguely at the air, at the hut, at the new room, at all of it, this stays here. Yes. Owen nodded once, shortly, the nod of a man who has accepted a circumstance he doesn't like but can't change. He looked at Harry one final time. Harry looked up and made a sound, cheerful, uncomplicated, carrying the Force in it like a song carries a key. Owen Lars, who was not a sentimental man, left quickly, which told Obi-Wan everything about how that interaction had actually gone. That night, with Harry asleep in the new room and the desert deep in its cold, dark silence, Obi-Wan sat and reached into the Force and found, far across any distance he could measure, the presence of Qui-Gon Jinn, not a ghost, not yet, not clearly, but an echo, a harmonic in the living Force that was shaped like his master and smelled, somehow metaphysically, of coruscant mornings and absolute conviction. He didn't know if Qui-Gon could hear him. He didn't know if any of this was real in the way that rocks and moisture vaporators were real, or if it was something the Force produced for people who needed it badly enough. He said anyway, into the dark, I found something. The echo shifted, settled, listened. He's extraordinary. He's going to be extraordinary, I can already tell, and I know you'll say I said the same thing before, but this is he has something Anakin didn't, not more power, different. It's like the Force has been working on something for a long time and finally managed what it was trying to do. He paused. He has his mother's eyes and his father's hair, and I don't know anything about either of them except that they died doing the same thing we all tried to do and failed at, which is protect what matters most. The desert wind moved through the canyon. Far away, a Tuscan drum, slow and ritual, keeping time for something. I'm going to do this right, Obi-Wan said. I don't know what right looks like exactly, but I know what wrong looks like. I know every shape of it. And this time I'm not going to mistake the map for the territory. He stopped, exhaled. I'm going to love him. I know what the code says. I know what it cost before. I am going to love him anyway, and I am going to teach him that love is not the trap, that love without honesty, love without boundaries, love that becomes possession, that is the trap, not the love itself. He sat with that for a while. Then he said very quietly, I think you would have liked him, Master. The echo in the Force did something that was not speech and not silence, and that Obi-Wan chose to interpret as agreement. He went to sleep in his chair, the way he often did. In the other room, Harry slept on, dreaming whatever it was that extraordinary children dreamed on their first planets, breathing the desert air, one hand still curved around the wooden toy that had been packed by his mother in another world, in another life, in a love that had not ended just because she had. Outside, the stars, both of Tatooine's moons, the endless sand, and something new and unnamed under the roof of a stone hut, waiting for morning. Chapter 2, Sand and spells 7 years on Tatooine does things to a person. It bleaches the color out of fabric and patience out of temperament, and any remaining illusions about the romance of exile firmly out of the soul. It teaches you the specific rhythm of survival, water first, shade second, everything else negotiable. It makes you lane and quiet and economical with words because the desert has no interest in words and eventually you start to agree with it. It had done all of these things to Obi-Wan Kenobi and he had made a reasonable peace with most of them. What it had not done, what 7 years of sand and silence and Twin Sun summers had entirely failed to accomplish, was make Harry Potter quiet. "I know what you're going to say," Harry said, dropping from the top of the rock formation with the casual confidence of someone who had been climbing things since he was 3 and had never once fallen, because when you started falling the Force caught you before you'd finished deciding whether to be alarmed. He landed in a crouch on the sand and stood up in the same motion, dark hair going in 7 directions, robe already dusty from the climb. "You're going to say I should have taken the longer route." "I'm not going to say anything," Obi-Wan said. He was sitting on a lower rock in the shade, which he had found some years ago, and cultivated the way some men cultivated gardens. "You already know what I would have said. The longer route takes 40 minutes. Yes, the short route takes 12. Yes, so the longer route is what we're doing tomorrow," Obi-Wan said, "and the day after, until you can do it in under 30 minutes, and then we'll talk about the short route." Harry made a sound that was not quite a sigh and not quite a word, and was entirely a 7-year-old's position on the subject of longer routes. He dropped down onto the rock beside Obi-Wan and pulled out his water flask, habit, trained into him young, drink before you think you need to, and drank 3 swallows, no more. Obi-Wan watched this without expression, which was the expression he used when something pleased him considerably. 7 years. He still sometimes caught himself marveling at it, the sheer accumulating fact of Harry, the way the child had grown into himself with a velocity and a character that felt inevitable in retrospect and astonishing in real time. He was small for his age, which Obi-Wan suspected was a Potter family trait based on the photograph, and he had his father's dark disorder of hair and his mother's eyes, and something in the set of his jaw when he'd made a decision that was entirely and stubbornly his own. He climbed everything. He had opinions about everything. He asked questions with a relentlessness that had, in the early years, occasionally made Obi-Wan wish for the uncomplicated silence of the desert, and had now, more honestly, become one of his favorite sounds in the galaxy. The Force moved through him like a second atmosphere. Obi-Wan had taught young Jedi before, had taught the most powerful of a generation, and Harry was something categorically different. Not louder exactly, cleaner, more fluid. He didn't push the Force, he moved with it the way a river moves, finding the path and taking it without resistance. And underneath that, braided so thoroughly into it that separating the two had long since proven impossible and probably inadvisable, was the magic. It had taken Obi-Wan 2 years to understand what the magic was. It wasn't the Force. It wasn't not the Force. It was something that had evolved alongside it, perhaps from it, a particular expression of it that had taken root in a specific human population on a specific world, and developed its own grammar and its own rules and its own stunning range of things it could do that the Force could not. Where the Force was breath, ambient, essential, always present, magic was more like fire. It needed something to burn. It needed intention and emotion, and the particular focused desire to transform the world from one thing into another. In Harry, the two were braided together so thoroughly that when he moved the Force he also, sometimes, moved the magic and vice versa, and the interactions between them produced effects that Obi-Wan had stopped trying to predict and started simply documenting with the slightly dazed wonder of a scientist who keeps walking into his lab to find his experiment has done something new overnight. "There's an animal under that rock," Harry said. Obi-Wan looked. A perfectly ordinary rock 30 feet away, half buried in sand. "What kind?" Harry considered. His eyes went slightly unfocused in the particular way they did when he was listening to the Force rather than looking with his eyes. Soft, small, scared. Scared of what? Us, I think, mostly me. A pause. "I might have startled it when I landed." "You might have," Obi-Wan agreed. Harry looked at the rock for a moment longer with that soft, unfocused attention, and Obi-Wan watched without comment as the fear presence under the rock, a small thing, a desert mouse of some kind, nothing remarkable, smoothed gradually from spike to quiet. Harry wasn't doing anything visible. He was simply being present at the creature, the way you can make a frightened thing less frightened sometimes by being entirely unthreatening, and he was doing it in the Force as naturally as breathing. Obi-Wan had never taught him that. He taught him the concept, presence, awareness, extending calm through the Force rather than just drawing information from it. The application was entirely Harry's. "Better," Harry asked. "You could have just waited. Waiting takes longer." Harry stood, shook sand off his robe with practiced efficiency, and turned toward the settlement. Dinner, Obi-Wan agreed. They walked home through the cooling afternoon, the long shadows of the Jundland rock formation stretching east, the first stars appearing in the darkening west the way they always did on Tatooine, not gradually, but all at once like the sky making a decision. Harry walked a half-step ahead the way he always did on the return route, not quite running, just always in mild forward motion, as though stillness was a state he accepted only under duress. "Tell me a planet," Harry said. This was a game they'd played for years, Obi-Wan's version of geography lessons. "Camino," Obi-Wan said, "ocean world, constantly raining. Very tall people, very white, extremely polite in a way that always made me feel I'd done something wrong. Cloning facilities, tidal ranges that would swallow most buildings." A half-second pause. "You don't like talking about Camino." "I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Your voice gets different." Harry glanced back at him. "Was it important? Camino was where the clone army was created, the army that fought in the Clone Wars, the army that, when ordered to, killed all the Jedi." He said it flatly, factually, without the weight he'd carried for years. He'd made a decision early on that Harry would know the history clearly, not sanitized, not dramatized, just clear. A child raised in lies, however well-intentioned, does not develop good judgment. A child raised in uncomfortable truths does. So yes, it was important. Harry was quiet for a moment. The clones didn't choose to do it. Number, so you don't blame them. Number, but it still happened. Yes, it still happened. He watched the boy's profile. "What's your point?" "I'm not making a point. I'm just," Harry shrugged, the gesture of someone working something out. "I'm thinking about whether you can do something terrible, and it still not be your fault. Like if the terrible thing was done to you first." Obi-Wan let that sit for a moment before he answered, because it deserved to sit. That is one of the oldest questions in ethics. Entire philosophical traditions have organized themselves around it. What I believe personally is that we draw a line between culpability and responsibility. The clones were not culpable, they were robbed of choice. But we are all responsible for understanding what we were part of and what it means, and making different choices when we have them. Is that what you do? "I try," Harry nodded, satisfied. He went back to the game. "Tell me another." "Mandalore. Warriors. History of conflict. Current period of pacifism. You were there for the siege. You knew someone there." He said this carefully, navigating the particular geography of Obi-Wan's past that he had learned to read. "Someone important. Someone very important. You don't have to tell me. I know." Obi-Wan stepped over a loose stone in the path. Her name was Satine. She was the Duchess of Mandalore, and she believed in peace with a conviction that made most people's convictions look decorative. She was also more stubborn than anyone I've ever known, and I say that having raised you for 7 years. Harry made a sound that was almost, nearly, not quite a laugh. He kept his eyes forward. "Did you?" "Yes," Obi-Wan said simply. "What happened?" "She was killed. By a man who hated her for what she represented." He said it without adornment, because the adornment never helped. "I held her when she died. The desert absorbed that." Harry walked quietly for 30 seconds, 30 full seconds, which was a very long time for Harry to be quiet, and Obi-Wan counted it with something adjacent to tenderness. "I'm sorry," Harry said. "Thank you." They walked the rest of the way home in comfortable silence. The incident in Mos Eisley happened because of a merchant named Dex Taggart and his deeply questionable approach to weights and measures. They went to Mos Eisley 4 times a year for supplies. It was, by any standard, an unpleasant place, a cancerous sprawl of cantinas and repair shops and criminal enterprise spread out under the twin suns like something a desert had coughed up. But it had what they needed, and Obi-Wan had long since learned its rhythms and safe routes, in which stall owners could be trusted, and which would shortchange you cheerfully if you let them. Harry loved it with the wholehearted enthusiasm of someone whose daily scenery was a rock hut and a lot of sand. He moved through the spaceport crowds with bright eyes, and the Force running active and interested just below the surface, cataloging everything. Taggart ran a grain stall in the 3rd market row. He was thick-armed and loud, and believed that tourists, off-worlders, and anyone wearing a robe were natural targets for commercial creativity. He had shortchanged Obi-Wan twice before, and both times Obi-Wan had produced the exact difference from his own pocket and said nothing, because a fight in Mos Eisley Market over 8 credits was not worth anyone's time. Today Taggart shortchanged him 40 credits and, when corrected, looked directly at him and said, with the confidence of a man who has never had his confidence tested, "That's the price." Obi-Wan considered the 40 credits. He considered the line of people behind him. He considered his own long-standing policy of not drawing attention. He said quietly, "I'd like my change." That's the price, Taggart said again. He was smiling. He was the kind of man who thought smiling made him look reasonable. Harry, standing at Obi-Wan's shoulder, said nothing. Obi-Wan could feel him listening, not agitated, not building toward anything, just attending, learning, waiting to see. The price at your stall last season, and the season before that, and at every other grain stall in this row, Obi-Wan said, is 32 credits per unit. You charged me 72. The difference is 40 credits. I'd like them back. Taggart leaned forward. He was a head taller than Obi-Wan, and he knew it and used it. You some kind of traitor, you keeping notes on my prices. I have a good memory. Well, your memory's wrong. Obi-Wan looked at him for a long moment. He was not afraid of Taggart. He was not remotely afraid of Taggart. He was, if he was honest, mildly bored by Taggart, and the greater portion of his attention was on Harry, because Harry had been very still for about 15 seconds now, and stillness in Harry generally preceded something interesting. 40 credits, Obi-Wan said. One more time. Taggart reached under the counter and came up with a blaster, which he did not point at anyone specifically, more just produced, the way some men produce arguments as a conversation ender. Walk away, old man. And Harry said in the clear, uncomplicated voice of someone who has thought this through and arrived at a conclusion, that's not going to work. Taggart looked at him. 7 years old, dark-haired, dust on his robe, chin tilted up. Meeting Taggart's eyes with an expression that was not aggression, and was not fear, and was something in between that, Obi-Wan recognized as Harry having arrived at a position he intended to hold. Boy, Taggart said. The blaster, Harry said, is not going to work, because if you point it at him, I'll stop it, and then everyone in this row will have seen what I can do, and then we'll have a much bigger problem than 40 credits. He tilted his head slightly. Give him the money. The Force moved through Harry in a long, quiet wave, not violent, not aggressive, not a push, more like a fact being stated at the level where facts become physical. The stall owner standing to Taggart's left took a sudden small step sideways. A cup hanging from the awning above them swung in no wind. Taggart felt it. Even with no sensitivity whatsoever, even with no framework for what he was feeling, Taggart felt it the way animals feel weather, some deep instinctual register that said, this is something I have never encountered before, and I should make different choices. He put the blaster down. He counted 40 credits onto the counter with hands that were slightly less steady than they'd been 30 seconds ago, and he pushed them across without a word, and when Obi-Wan picked them up, Taggart did not make eye contact. They walked away down the market row. Obi-Wan waited until they had turned the corner into a quieter alley before he said anything. What was your plan, he said, if he had called your bluff? It wasn't a bluff. Harry, I would have caught the bolt. I've been practicing. Harry looked up at him. I have been practicing. You said, I said it was an advanced technique. I said we would revisit it before year's end. I did not say feel free to announce it to armed market vendors. I didn't announce it. I just implied it. The distinction, Obi-Wan said, between implied and announced is significantly less important than the distinction between controlled and uncontrolled. Can you deflect a blaster bolt, consistently, under stress, a pause? Mostly. Mostly is not a word I want attached to blaster deflection. He wasn't going to shoot. I could feel that he wasn't. Obi-Wan stopped. They were in the alley now, out of the main flow of foot traffic, the sounds of the market, a wall of noise behind them. He turned to look at Harry properly. The boy met his eyes without flinching. He was not defensive. That was the thing about Harry. He was almost never defensive. He stated his positions and held them, and expected you to engage with the position rather than the fact that he'd stated it, which was either a sign of remarkable confidence or a sign that Obi-Wan had failed to introduce sufficient self-doubt into his upbringing, and it was probably some of both. You read him through the Force, Obi-Wan said. Yes, and you were confident enough in that reading to stake your safety on it. Your safety, Harry corrected. And yes, Obi-Wan looked at him. The Force was full of Harry, bright and warm and entirely honest, and he could feel the reading the boy had taken of Taggart still echoing in his awareness, a man whose aggression was performance, whose bluster was the whole of him, who would have backed down given a single solid surface to push against. Harry had provided the surface, and he had been right. Your read was accurate, Obi-Wan said. Harry didn't say I know, which showed more restraint than Obi-Wan had given him credit for. He just nodded. However, Obi-Wan said, accurate and reliable are different things. A correct read in one situation does not guarantee a correct read in the next. What you did today you will eventually be able to do with confidence. You are not there yet, and the cost of being wrong in such a situation is not 40 credits. I know, Harry said, and this time it was quiet and honest, without the usual edge of I know, stop explaining. He was genuinely listening. He was looking at you like you were nothing, like because you were standing there calmly not doing anything, he thought he'd won. Obi-Wan studied him, and that bothered you. He had a blaster and he thought that made him right. Harry's jaw was set. It didn't. No, Obi-Wan agreed. It didn't. He started walking again. Harry fell into step beside him. But there will be people with more than blasters who think the same thing. What you demonstrated today will work on a great many opponents and will not work on a very important few, and learning to tell the difference is the work of years, not afternoons. So I should have done nothing. I said nothing the first 2 times he shortchanged me. Harry looked at him. Why? Because 40 credits is not worth revealing what I am. Or it wasn't. A pause. Today the calculation was different. Why? Because you were there, Obi-Wan said simply, and I was not going to let him point a blaster at you. Harry absorbed this, said nothing, but the Force shifted around him in that way it did when something had landed properly. They bought the rest of their supplies from vendors who did not shortchange them, and they started home, and the twin sons began their slow, magnificent descent toward the western dunes, and Obi-Wan let the rest of it sit quiet until the market was well behind them. That night they sat on the roof of the hut, which was flat and retained the day's heat just long enough to make it the best place on Tatooine to be at night before it cooled to the desert cold and drove you back inside. Harry was lying on his back with his arms folded behind his head, watching the stars emerge. Obi-Wan sat with his legs crossed and a cup of something hot and only generously describable as tea, and looked out over the Jundland wastes while the light died. The magic is different from the Force, Harry said, not a question. They had talked about this before, but Harry came back to it regularly, circling it like a problem he wasn't satisfied with yet. Yes, and number. That's not an answer. It's an accurate answer. They come from the same source, or they come from sources that are aligned in ways we don't fully understand, but they express differently. The Force is pervasive. It lives in everything, in all life, in the connections between living things. The magic is specific, Harry said. Seems to be. It responds to will and to emotion in a more direct way, more transactional, more combustible. Harry was quiet for a moment. When I got angry at Taggart. There was something, not just the Force going out, there was something underneath it that felt like it wanted to do more. Like if I'd let it, it would have. He stopped. Turn the stall to something unpleasant, Obi-Wan said. Something like that. A pause. Is that the magic? I think so, yes. How do I control it? You've been controlling it your whole life. You've been doing it without knowing. Most of the time you manage both strands at once without thinking about it. But when you're angry, the magic moves faster than the Force and it doesn't wait for intention. He drank his tea. Your mother's magic almost certainly worked this way. She was, what little I can infer about her suggests, she was extraordinarily powerful, and that her power was deeply tied to her emotional state. Harry turned his head to look at him. You don't know enough about her. Number, I know what the letter tells me and what I could infer from the house and what the Force told me that night, which was, he paused, considerable, but not specific. What did the Force tell you? He'd answered this question before too, but not the same way twice because Harry was always ready for more. That she loved you with a completeness that was structural, not just emotional. It had changed the physical reality around you. Whatever they tried to do to you that night, it hit that love and could not pass through it. Harry looked back at the sky. That's what defeated him. Love. Whatever it was, it worked. A pause. I've spent 7 years thinking about it. I've discussed it with Qui-Gon's Echo in the Force, who is annoyingly unsurprised, and I've come to this. The Force holds life in it. All life. It does not want life to end, not as a moral position, but as a fundamental nature. What your mother did was align herself with that nature so completely, with so much intention, that the Force treated her love as a living thing, and things that are alive in the Force are very difficult to kill. Silence. The stars were fully out now, the Tatoo system's crowded sky blazing from horizon to horizon. Do I have it? Harry asked. That thing she had. You have more of it than anyone I've ever encountered. He said it without decoration, because it was simply true, but it isn't power to be aimed, it's a quality, it's who you are. Harry considered the stars. We should know more about her, he said finally, and him and all of it. Yes, Obi-Wan agreed. How do we find out? Slowly, carefully. When the time is right, we go to where they were from and we learn what we need to know. You know something, Harry said. He had the exact tone he always used when he felt Obi-Wan holding something back, not accusatory, just precise. A quality like a probe. You know something you haven't told me yet. Obi-Wan looked at the stars. I know that on the night I found you, there was something very dark in that house. Something that had tried and failed to kill you and had not survived the attempt. And I know that failure does not necessarily mean extinction. He chose his words with care. I know that what tried to kill you may still have the intention of finishing what it started. the silence that followed was not a frightened silence. Harry lay on the flat roof under the stars, and he was quiet for a long moment, and what moved through his force presence was not fear. It was the quality Obi-Wan had been watching develop for 7 years, that particular stillness that is not passivity, but rather readiness. A person standing on their own ground. Then we should be ready, Harry said. We will be, not eventually. We should start whatever's next. I've been here for 7 years and I love it here, but I can feel that things are changing. He paused. Can't you? He could. He'd been feeling it for months, a shift in the living force, distant but directional, like watching weather build on a far horizon. Things aligning themselves toward a point. He had not said so, because Harry didn't need to carry that yet. But Harry, apparently, was already carrying it. Tell me about the wizarding world, Harry said. Obi-Wan looked at him. I know you know about it. You've been reading about it since you brought me back. I've seen the books. They're not in basic, whatever language they're in, but they're not like anything from this universe. You found them somehow. He had. It had taken 2 years, a great deal of careful force navigation through the thin places between worlds, and a very peculiar afternoon in a London used bookshop that the proprietor would never be able to fully explain. He had 11 volumes on magical history, 3 on magical theory, 1 extraordinary text on the subject of magical law, and a children's pictorial introduction to the concept of Hogwarts, which he had read 5 times because it was the most useful of the lot. You should have told me you'd found them, Harry said, not angry, just clear. You're right, Obi-Wan said. I should have. This surprised Harry enough that he sat up. In 7 years, Obi-Wan had apologized to him exactly 4 times, and each time meant it, which had given the act a weight that most people's apologies never developed. Really, you're not a project, Harry. You're not a student I'm managing. You have a right to know what touches your own life. He turned to look at him. I was protecting you. I want to be honest about that. I was protecting you from things I hadn't finished understanding yet, and that was a mistake born from good intentions, which is the only kind that really does damage. Harry absorbed this. What's in the books? A world. Complicated, beautiful, occasionally embarrassing in its assumptions, genuinely remarkable in its history. A culture that has been aware of magic for centuries and has built a civilization around it, separate from the non-magical world, self-contained and self-referential. He paused. A world that, if I've read correctly, knows your name. Harry went very still. There was someone, Obi-Wan said carefully, who tried to destroy that world. Who in fact tried to destroy it by starting with you. And when you survived, when you did what you did that night without knowing you were doing it, the world called you a hero, celebrated you, built a story around you. He paused. They've been waiting for you, waiting for me to come back, waiting for a version of you that I didn't raise, Obi-Wan said, waiting for a child shaped by grief and unknowing, waiting, in all probability, for someone they could manage. He said it plainly because Harry deserved plain things and watched his son, not by blood, but the word fit and always had, work through it. And instead they'll get me, Harry said. And instead they'll get you, Obi-Wan agreed. He did not add what he thought, which was, and I am genuinely uncertain whether they're ready for that. There's more. There's a man, old, extremely powerful, a wizard of, he considered the volumes, generational significance. He arranged, on the night I found you, to have you placed in the care of your mother's relatives who were not magical and did not know you. He believes you should grow up among them. Why? His reasons are complex. I've spent years thinking about them, and I believe he is not a foolish or cruel man. He genuinely wants to protect you and protect his world, and he has a plan for how that happens, and his plan requires a you that doesn't exist. Because you took me first. Because I took you first. Harry was quiet for a long time. The heat was leaving the roof now, the cold coming in from the desert, and somewhere out in the dark a Tuscan fire was burning on a distant ridge, a tiny orange point. Are you worried about what happens when they find out? Harry asked. The man, his name is Dumbledore, may already suspect something. People with his level of power and his years of practice develop instincts that are not far from what we'd call force sensitivity, and he expected you to arrive somewhere and you didn't. Obi-Wan turned his cup in his hands. He will find out eventually, perhaps soon. What do? We continue as we are. We accelerate somewhat the work I had planned for the next 2 years, and we wait. For what? For an owl, Obi-Wan said. Because he'd read the children's pictorial guide 3 times, and he was fairly certain he knew how this particular piece of the story was going to arrive. Harry looked at him. An owl. It's a long story. We have time. We have approximately 4 years, if I'm reading the timeline correctly. Obi-Wan stood, brushing dust from his robe. Tomorrow. Full story tomorrow. Tonight sleep. Harry didn't argue, which meant he was more tired than he was showing, which was itself a piece of information. Obi-Wan watched him drop through the roof hatch with the unconscious physical grace of someone who moved through the Force so naturally that even gravity had accommodated itself to his preferences. He stayed on the roof a moment longer. The Tuscan fire burned its small orange point. The stars were enormous. He thought about Dumbledore, had thought about him many times, had constructed him carefully from second-hand evidence and historical accounts in those 11 books, had developed a respect for him that was genuine and specific, and did not in any way reduce the problem he presented. A brilliant man, a man who had shaped an entire generation around a single strategic sacrifice. A man who looked at the big picture with a clarity that was almost Force-like in its breadth, and who was therefore capable of losing sight of the specific, breathing human being inside the picture's frame. He thought about Harry, asleep now probably, or nearly, the Force around him settling into the rhythms of rest, still present, still warm, still that particular quality of brightness that Obi-Wan had never been able to describe to anyone because there was no one to describe it to. He thought about what came next, the accelerated training, the history Harry deserved to know, the world that was waiting for him like a stage already built for a play they had already cast, and instead they'll get me. Obi-Wan smiled at the dark. He went inside. 3 weeks after the market, Harry came in from the morning run, 6 miles along the canyon ridge in the heat, because Obi-Wan had increased the distance and stopped in the doorway. Obi-Wan was sitting at the table with one of the magical history books open in front of him, and a look on his face that Harry had learned to read as, "There is a thing I have decided and I am working out how to say it." "We're starting saber work," Harry said. Obi-Wan looked up. "Good morning." "We're starting saber work," Harry said again. It was not a question. "Yes." He closed the book. "It's time." From the shelf behind him, where it had sat for 7 years, Harry's kyber crystal caught the morning light and held it. It was blue, so deep it was almost violet, and Obi-Wan had found it in the first year, had felt it in the Force like a bell struck once at a very great distance, and had brought it back without ceremony and placed it on the shelf and said, "When you're ready," and said nothing else about it. Harry crossed the room in 4 steps and picked it up. He'd handled it before, many times, always briefly, always with the same quality of attention he gave to things that mattered. But today he held it properly, both hands, and let the Force move through it, and it sang. Not a literal sound, a resonance. The crystal woke to him like something that had been waiting. "I'll show you how to build the casing," Obi-Wan said, coming around the table. "Everything else you already know without knowing you know it. The crystal is the heart, the rest is just engineering." Harry looked up from the crystal. His eyes were bright. "You've been waiting to do this. I've been waiting for you to be ready. I was ready 2 years ago." "No," Obi-Wan said. "You were capable 2 years ago. Those are different things." He put a hand on Harry's shoulder, briefly, and felt the crystal singing between them in the Force. 2 presences, 1 master and 1 student, the beginning of the oldest relationship in the Jedi tradition. Capable is what you can do. Ready is knowing why you're doing it. Harry looked at the crystal for a long moment. "I'm doing it," he said, "because people point blasters at the people I love, and I'd like to be able to stop them." It was not the Jedi Code. It was not transcendent or philosophical or properly selfless in the way the Code preferred selflessness. But it was true and it was his, and the Force rang with it like a clear note struck in an empty room. "Good enough," Obi-Wan said. He sat down with Harry at the table and they started with the casing diagram. Outside, the desert was heating up for another long afternoon, the twin suns climbing side by side the way they always did, and nothing on Tatooine looked different from how it had looked the day before, and everything was. Chapter 3. The Owl and the Lightsaber. The owl arrived on a Tuesday. Obi-Wan knew it was Tuesday because he kept a calendar, a habit from his years in the Order where days had operational significance, carried over into exile where they had none, maintained now mostly out of stubbornness, and the minor comfort of knowing what to call things. Tuesday, the 17th of July, clear sky, both suns up, temperature already climbing toward the kind of heat that made the sand shimmer like liquid. He was outside running forms when the bird appeared, a large tawny owl, which had absolutely no business being on Tatooine, and carried itself with the self-possessed air of something that was aware of this and didn't care. It dropped from the western sky in a long, confident glide and landed on the flat top of the water vaporator with the precision of something guided, which it was. Obi-Wan stopped mid-form. He looked at the owl. The owl looked at him with enormous amber eyes that had an opinion in them. Tied to its leg with the kind of methodical neatness that suggested institutional correspondence rather than personal, was an envelope. Thick cream paper, slightly shimmering, sealed with dark wax. "Harry," Obi-Wan called. Harry was on the roof. He'd taken to meditating up there in the mornings, which Obi-Wan had encouraged because it indicated the development of something approximating patience, which Harry needed more work on than almost anything else. There was a scrape of boots, and then Harry dropped off the roof edge and landed in the sand beside him, lightsaber at his hip, hair going everywhere. He looked at the owl. He looked at Obi-Wan. "That's the owl," he said. "That is the owl." Harry stared at it for a long moment. He was 11 now, had grown into his frame in the way desert children did, lean and capable, and with a stillness that only appeared when something genuinely mattered, layered over the constant forward energy that was his default. The crystal on his belt had been a working lightsaber for 3 months, and he carried it the way Obi-Wan had carried his at that age, not dramatically, just naturally, the way you carry something that's part of you. He walked to the vaporator. The owl watched him approach without moving. He untied the letter, and the owl, job complete, spread its wings and lifted back into the Tatooine sky without ceremony, which Obi-Wan found himself respecting. Harry turned the envelope over. Read what was on the front. He looked up. "How does it know my name? Magic has a very precise sense of identity. It says the hut near the Junland wastes." Harry's tone was somewhere between impressed and unsettled. "It found me on the wrong planet." "I know. That's remarkable. Yes, read it." Harry opened it. Read it through once quickly, the way he read everything, absorbing at speed, not performing comprehension. Then he read it again slowly. Then he handed it to Obi-Wan. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, the letterhead in green ink, elaborate crest below it. The letter confirmed his acceptance, listed his required supplies, provided a starting date of September 1st, and directed him to Diagon Alley for said supplies. It was exactly what the children's pictorial guide had described, and exactly what Obi-Wan had expected, and it still landed with a particular weight. He handed it back to Harry. "So," Harry said, "we're going." "Yes, to England, through the thin place. It's easier now than it was the first time. I've made the crossing 11 times in the last 4 years, and the Force holds the path reasonably well." He watched Harry fold the letter back into its envelope with careful hands. "It's time anyway. We need the bookshop, and you need to see where you're from." Harry looked at the envelope. Something moved through his Force presence, not the fear-grief of a child confronting an origin story, but something more complicated and adult for it. Curiosity and caution braided together with a thread of something he recognized as a kind of hunger. He wanted to know. He had always wanted to know. "Godric's Hollow," Harry said. "Not this trip. Eventually." "Yes, eventually." Obi-Wan put a hand briefly on his shoulder. "One thing at a time. The crossing was not easier. It was less physically catastrophic than the first time. Obi-Wan didn't need the wall to stay upright, and Harry, crossing for the first time, simply landed in a controlled crouch and rose without comment, which said everything about what 7 years of training had done for his physical equanimity. But the transition between worlds had its own quality of wrongness, the way 2 notes very close in pitch produce a beating frequency, and even after 11 crossings, it made Obi-Wan's teeth ache for about 30 seconds on the other side. They arrived in an alley in London on a grey July morning, which was a significant improvement over the alternative of arriving in the middle of a street, which had happened once. Harry straightened his robe. They were wearing Muggle clothes over it, jeans and jackets, because Obi-Wan had learned on his first research trip that appearing in full desert robes in central London drew a specific kind of attention, and looked around at the city with the expression of someone whose entire reference for urban space was Mos Eisley, recalibrating. "It's wet," Harry said. "England generally is. It's cold. It's July." Harry pulled his jacket tighter and looked up at the gray sky with the expression of someone who had been told about rain theoretically and was now encountering it as a practical matter. "How far is the alley?" "Leaky Cauldron is about 6 minutes north. We'll walk." Obi-Wan set off. Harry fell in beside him, head turning as they moved through the street, cataloging everything, the cars, the red buses, the buildings pressed close together, the people moving in the particular purposeful shuffle of London crowds. He said nothing. He was listening to the Force the way Obi-Wan had taught him, reading the city as a living thing. "There are people here who have magic," Harry said after about 2 minutes. "Several, yes. London has a significant magical population, well hidden." He glanced sideways. "Can you feel where they are? That woman with the yellow bag, the man at the coffee window." A pause. "There's something ahead that feels thicker, like the Force pools there. That's the Leaky Cauldron, the entrance to Diagon Alley. It exists in both worlds simultaneously, which creates a particular resonance." Harry was quiet for a moment. "Is this what you felt when you first came through, to find me?" "What I felt was more specific, more urgent." He kept his eyes ahead. "But the quality of it, yes." "Similar?" A pause. "Magic has a particular signature in the Force. like a harmonic. Once you felt it, you recognize it everywhere. The leaky cauldron appeared between a bookshop and an optician, exactly as advertised, dark, cramped, low-ceilinged, smelling of centuries of beer and old smoke. The barman was mopping something that had probably not needed mopping, and looked up when they came in with the professionally uninterested expression of someone who had seen stranger things before breakfast. Harry stopped just inside the door. The pub was mostly empty at this hour, a few patrons hunched over glasses, a witch in the corner reading a newspaper that moved. But the force in here was different, layered, multiple magical signatures overlapping. The ambient residue of decades of magic worked in close quarters. Harry stood in it with his eyes slightly unfocused, just taking it in. "All right," Obi-Wan said quietly. "It's strange," Harry said, not disturbed, interested. "It's like standing in the middle of a conversation in a language I don't speak yet. You'll speak it soon enough." They passed through the pub and into the back, and Obi-Wan tapped the bricks in the precise sequence he had memorized from a careful reading of every piece of material he'd acquired, and the wall opened, and Diagon Alley spread out ahead of them in all its extraordinary, impractical, wonderful specificity. Harry stopped again. Obi-Wan waited. He had found, across 11 years of raising Harry, that the correct response to Harry stopping to absorb something new was silence, and that interrupting this process was almost always a mistake. Diagon Alley was busy. July was peak purchasing season. Half the alley appeared to be in the same situation they were, first-year students and their families navigating the supply list, the air full of voices and occasional owl hoots, and the particular energy of people who were excited and slightly overwhelmed. Brightly colored shop fronts, cauldrons in a stack outside a supply shop, a pair of girls their age arguing over which color of ink was better. The Gringotts Bank at the far end, white and pillared, and occupying its space with the specific confidence of institutions that have never needed to prove themselves. "This is real," Harry said. "Did you think it wasn't?" "I thought it was possible it was a detailed lie you decided to tell me." He said it completely neutrally, as a person states a hypothesis. "It isn't. Number it isn't." Harry looked at the alley for a moment longer, then, "Where first? Gringotts, you have a vault." Harry turned to look at him. "I have a vault. Your family had assets, considerable ones from what I understand. The vault is yours by inheritance." He started walking. "You may find this gratifying or uncomfortable. Both are valid responses. What do I do with a vault full of wizard money? Buy your books and a wand." He kept walking. "And whatever else is on the list." They went to Gringotts first. The goblins were exactly as the books had described, short, long-fingered, ancient-eyed, and they looked at Harry with a recognition that Obi-Wan watched carefully. The one who processed their request checked something in a ledger and said, with the precise inflection of a being who experiences considerable professional satisfaction, "Mr. Potter, we had wondered when you would arrive." "I was held up," Harry said pleasantly. The goblin looked at him for a long moment. "Indeed." He produced a small key. "Your vault is in good order. 10 years of investment returns have been logged and applied. You are," a brief, measured pause, "considerably more comfortable than you may have expected." Harry took the key without particular expression, which was the exact right reaction, and Obi-Wan noted it. The vault was staggering. Harry stood at its entrance and looked at it for about 5 seconds and then turned away, which was also the right reaction. "We'll take what we need for today," Obi-Wan said. "That barely makes a dent," Harry said quietly, looking at the columns of gold. "Number, but it's also not going anywhere." He met Harry's eyes. "It doesn't change who you are." "I know," a pause. "It changes what I can do, though." "Yes, it does." He let that sit. "That's a conversation for later. Today, supplies." They loaded their bag with galleons and left the vault and rode the cart back up through the mountain of the bank in the dark, which Harry appeared to find genuinely enjoyable. They had been in Diagon Alley for approximately 40 minutes and were outside Flourish and Blots when Obi-Wan felt it. Not an attack, not a threat, something more like a chess player clearing their throat across a board. He had been expecting it. He had been expecting it for 4 years, had run the calculation many times, had accepted that it was inevitable. But expectation and reality are two different states, and they arrived in the body differently. The old man was sitting on a chair outside Madame Malkin's, ostensibly reading a newspaper, wearing robes of deep blue that were aggressively ordinary in their effort not to be remarkable. Long white beard, half-moon spectacles, a face that carried 8 decades of immense capability and strategic patience in its lines, and had learned to arrange all of that behind an expression of kind, mild benevolence. Albus Dumbledore lowered his newspaper and looked at them across the alley, and his eyes, which were very blue and very sharp and not remotely obscured by the half-moon spectacles, landed on Harry with an expression that was only briefly readable before it was controlled. It was the expression of a man who has held a position for 10 years and has just discovered the ground is not where he expected it. Harry felt it too. His step didn't slow, but the force around him changed quality, alert, present. The same reading a new person mode Obi-Wan had watched him develop in the market 3 years ago. The man from the books, Harry said, quietly, not looking at him. Yes, he knows who I am. He has known who you were since before you were born. He's surprised. Yes, why? He must have known something was different. You said, he suspected. Suspecting and seeing are different. Obi-Wan kept walking at the same pace because stopping would be a concession. Don't stare. I'm not staring. I'm reading him. A pause. He's not threatening. He's not threatening. He is, however, operating several moves ahead of most conversations, and I'd appreciate it if you let me handle the first exchange. Harry made a sound that was somewhere between agreement and I'll do what I think is necessary. The old man rose from his chair. He moved with the ease of someone who had made a decision and was comfortable with having made it, and he crossed the alley toward them at a pace that was not fast and not slow, and arrived in front of them in a way that felt, to Obi-Wan, extremely carefully choreographed. Mr. Kenobi, he said. His voice was warm and clear. I had hoped we might speak. He looked at Harry with an expression that was complex, relief and calculation, and something that was close to sorrow moving quickly through it. And this must be Harry. Professor Dumbledore, Obi-Wan said. Dumbledore's eyes moved to him, the look of a man reassessing. You know me. I've known who you are for 10 years. I've been expecting this conversation for 4. He held the old man's gaze without effort. I thought perhaps here was better than wherever you had planned. You thought perhaps here in public among people was, yes, I can see the logic. The faintest smile, not warm exactly, appreciative, you're careful. I've had reason to be. Dumbledore looked at Harry again. Harry was looking back at him with the same direct, unhurried attention he gave to everything, and Obi-Wan watched Dumbledore recalibrate. He could see it, the adjustment of expectation, the man having come here with a prepared approach that was built on a foundation that no longer existed. Harry, Dumbledore said, I have wanted to meet you for a very long time. I know, Harry said, you had a plan for me. Dumbledore blinked, just once. Did you? He told me, Harry said. Most of it. Obi-Wan tells me things. The way he said Obi-Wan, easy, familiar. The way you say the name of someone who is simply part of how the world works, and the way Dumbledore heard it. Obi-Wan watched both happen and kept his own face entirely still. Perhaps, Dumbledore said carefully, we might find somewhere to sit. There was a tea shop at the quieter end of the alley, dark wood and small tables, the kind of place where the ambient noise gave cover for private conversations. They sat. A house elf brought tea that nobody had ordered, which was exactly the kind of thing that happened in wizarding spaces, and which Harry observed with interest. Dumbledore arranged his hands around his cup and looked at Obi-Wan with the expression of a man choosing his first words with care. I confess, he said, that I have imagined this conversation many times. The versions I imagined did not involve a Jedi Master. You know what I am. I have made a study of you these past years from what little evidence was available. There is a text very old from the early medieval period concerning certain practitioners who moved through what the author called the space between. He paused. It described something not unlike the Force. It described certain trained individuals who, it was not specific. He smiled. You are significantly less theoretical in person. What I am isn't the important thing, Obi-Wan said. Dumbledore's eyes moved to Harry. No, I suppose not. He was quiet for a moment. I had a plan for Harry, a careful plan built over years designed to give him the tools he needs to face what is coming while also ensuring that the ancient protections placed on him remain active. The blood protections, his aunt, they were placed with great precision and considerable sacrifice. They required Harry to live in his mother's bloodline until his 17th year. A pause. That is now not possible. Which means, Dumbledore continued, still measured, that certain protections that would have made Harry significantly safer in the years ahead are no longer in play, and replaced by others, Obi-Wan said. The protections placed on him by his mother's sacrifice still hold. That was never contingent on his address. He held Dumbledore's gaze. What you lose is the version of Harry you needed. What you have is Harry. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long moment. Harry was drinking his tea and had been quiet during this exchange, with the patience of someone who understood that this conversation needed to happen this way and was letting it, while missing absolutely nothing. May I ask, Dumbledore said to Harry directly, how you've been trained? In the Force, Harry said, and in the magic Obi-Wan found materials. I've read most of what he found. I understand the theory, though I haven't had formal instruction. He set his cup down. I also know about Voldemort, about what happened to my parents, about the prophecy. Dumbledore went very still. The prophecy. It was in one of the books, a historical account of the First War. Harry's voice was level. I know what it says, I know what it means. Dumbledore looked at Obi-Wan. You told him. I gave him books and allowed him to draw his own conclusions, Obi-Wan said, which is different. He is 11 years old. He is 11 years old and is the subject of the prophecy, Obi-Wan said, not unkindly but without give. It is his information. He had a right to it. The silence at the table had a particular quality, two men of great strategic capability applying it to the same problem from different angles, neither willing to concede the frame. Harry watched this with his green eyes and said nothing. Then Dumbledore did something Obi-Wan had not expected. He leaned back in his chair, and the careful arrangement of his expression relaxed slightly, and he let out a long, slow breath that was not theatrical but was real, and he said quietly, I have been playing a very long game. I have made decisions that I am not certain were right, and I made them anyway because I could not see another path. I could not see. He paused, and for a moment he was simply old and carrying something heavy, any way to the outcome that didn't require certain sacrifices. Sacrifices of other people, Obi-Wan said. Yes, quietly. Yes, that's what it amounts to. He looked at Harry. I would like to explain myself, if you'll allow it. Harry looked at him steadily. I'm not angry at you. I want to understand you, which is different. Something moved through Dumbledore's expression that was not quite surprise and not quite grief. He said, your mother used to say something very similar. The silence that followed that statement was brief and specific, and Harry did not fill it, which was an act of discipline that Obi-Wan noted with quiet pride. Dumbledore told them about Voldemort, about the First War, about the Horcruxes, though he used the word carefully and without complete explanation, clearly calculating how much to give. He told them about the prophecy's implications, the necessity of Harry being the one to end it. He told them about what he had expected Harry's 7th year to hold. Obi-Wan listened to all of it and ran every piece of information through every analytical tool he had, not from distrust, but from the same habit that had kept him alive through 3 wars. Dumbledore was not lying. He was editing selectively, which was different, and the edited pieces were the ones that related to Harry's eventual necessary sacrifice, the piece he had clearly not yet decided whether to disclose. Obi-Wan felt it in the Force as a closed door. He filed it away. I will tell you, Obi-Wan said, when Dumbledore finished, that I intend Harry to attend Hogwarts. I believe it's important. I believe he needs to learn magic in a community context, with instruction I cannot provide, and I believe he needs to be in the world rather than prepared for it from the outside. He paused. I also intend to remain in contact with him. I will not be absent while he is at school. Hogwarts has its own protections, which apparently did not prevent a defense against the dark arts teacher from harboring Voldemort on his person, Obi-Wan said. Dumbledore went very still. I've been feeling it since we arrived in the alley, Harry said. There's someone here today who has something dark attached to them. I didn't know what it meant. He looked at Obi-Wan. That's it, isn't it? You can feel it, Dumbledore said. He leaned forward slightly. At this distance. The Force doesn't do distance the way you'd expect, Harry said. Dumbledore studied him for a long moment. Then quietly, remarkable. He is, Obi-Wan said simply, which is why I will not leave him in a castle with an inadequate understanding of what's in it, regardless of the quality of its enchantments. Dumbledore settled back. He was thinking. They could all see him thinking, the visible process of a man adjusting a long-held strategy to account for significant new variables. He did it without distress, which Obi-Wan noted, a man who could revise without ego. That was important. I have one condition, Dumbledore said finally. One, at present, you will find I accumulate conditions as circumstances develop. The faint smile. My condition is this: Harry attends Hogwarts in good faith. He doesn't treat it as a proving ground or a strategic position. He is a student. I'm already a student, Harry said. I've been a student for 7 years. I'm fine with being a student. He paused. My condition is that you don't keep things from me because you think I need protecting from information. I'm the subject of a prophecy about a Dark Lord. I'd rather know. Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. That, he said finally, is a reasonable position. Though I would ask for some latitude in the timing of certain disclosures. Timing, yes, concealment, number. The old man actually smiled then, a real one, the lines of his face organizing themselves into something that was genuine. Your mother, he said, would have been exactly this difficult. Harry smiled back, which was a remarkable thing because it was warm and it was also completely unafraid. Good. Ollivanders was last on the list, and it was necessary, and Obi-Wan had been thinking about it for 4 years. The problem was not that Harry needed a wand. The problem was what the wand would tell them. He had read about wand siblings, about cores, about the brother wands, and the implications were both significant and immediately complicated, because if Harry's wand shared a core with the one that had killed his parents and tried to kill him, Ollivander would know at the moment he matched them, and the information would not stay in this shop. He had considered not going to Ollivander. He had done the research. There were other wand makers. But the Force had been consistent on the subject of Ollivander's every time he'd pushed against it. Here, the same quality of insistence it had used in that hut on Tatooine before everything changed. Harry pushed open the door and the bell rang, and the shop was exactly what the books had described: small, dusty, the smell of wood and something else, something that was magic in its concentrated form. Boxes upon boxes in endless columns, and a stillness that was particular to spaces where remarkable things were made. "I wondered," said a voice from the shadows, "when I would see Harry Potter." Garrick Ollivander moved out of the shelves like something that had simply always been there, and was only now becoming visible. He was old and pale, and his eyes were silver, and he looked at Harry the way certain people looked at particularly interesting problems. Then his eyes moved to Obi-Wan, and his expression changed. "And you," Ollivander said, "you are not from here." "No," Obi-Wan said, "you carry something." He tilted his head. "Something very old, not a wand." He paused. "You made it yourself, in a manner of speaking." Ollivander studied him for a long moment with those silver eyes that Obi-Wan suspected saw considerably more than the visible. Then he turned to Harry with the manner of a man who had decided to let something go for now and return to it. "Right then, Mr. Potter, let's see. The first 12 wands did nothing, or did things in the wrong direction, making shelves rattle or the window crack." Harry handled each one with patient willingness, trying each properly, feeling for the response. Obi-Wan watched Ollivander watching Harry, and watched the wandmaker's expression move through a calculation. Then Ollivander reached deep into the shelves and came back with a box that he held slightly differently from the others. "I think," he said, "this one has been waiting." Harry took the wand. 11 inches, holly, phoenix feather core. The moment his fingers closed around it, the air in the shop changed. A warmth, a rush, golden sparks from the tip trailing off like a sigh of relief. Harry held it up, and the Force moved through it in a way that was completely consistent with the Force moving through the Kyber crystal at his hip. Different frequencies, same fundamental note. 2 instruments, same musician. Ollivander was very still. "I remember every wand I've ever sold," he said quietly. "Every one, and I remember," he stopped. "The phoenix whose feather is in your wand gave another feather, just one other. That wand did what it did," Obi-Wan said. Ollivander looked at him sharply. "You know, I have prepared for this conversation. Then you know what this means. Twin cores. I know what it has been assumed to mean," Obi-Wan said. "I also know that assumptions built on incomplete information are frequently wrong." He met Ollivander's silver eyes. "Harry has resources that are not present in the conventional analysis." Ollivander looked at Harry, at the lightsaber at his hip, back at Obi-Wan. "Other customers," Ollivander said slowly, "do not walk in here carrying a blade with a crystal that sings in a register I have never encountered in 50 years of wand-making." He looked genuinely unsettled, which Obi-Wan suspected was not a common occurrence. "What are you?" "A Jedi," Harry said, "and a wizard, apparently both at the same time, which is a long story." Ollivander absorbed this. He looked at the holly wand in Harry's hand, and he looked at the lightsaber, and he seemed to be performing a rapid internal taxonomy of things he had believed to be impossible and whether the category still applied. "The twin cores," he said finally, "in conventional circumstances, can cause difficulties. When the wands meet, they will not behave as expected. The magic will refuse to act against itself." "I know about priori incantatem," Harry said. "It goes beyond the spell echo." "The bond between twin cores is," Ollivander paused, "it will affect anything wand to wand. You cannot beat him in a conventional duel while the bond holds." "Then I won't duel him conventionally," Harry said. He said it with the straightforward practicality of someone doing logistics, not bravado. "What else?" Ollivander stared at him for a moment. Then something in him made a decision, and he said with the clipped efficiency of a man sharing proprietary information under duress, "The bond goes both ways. He will feel it too. He has likely already felt the wand's activation." He hesitated. "He will know the wand found its match." The shop was quiet. "Good," Harry said. "That doesn't—" Ollivander stopped. "That doesn't worry you. He's been a problem since before I was born. He's not going to stop being a problem because I'm worried about him knowing I exist." Harry set the wand in his left hand, and the lightsaber was briefly, naturally in his right, not drawn, just there, just touched, and Ollivander made a small involuntary sound. What worries me is not understanding my own tools. What's the wand going to do when the bond activates? Ollivander regrouped. He told them about priori incantatem in technical detail, the nature of the resonance, the way it would manifest, the specific conditions required to trigger it. He was thorough and precise, and Obi-Wan committed every word, because this was the kind of information that lived in the gap between victory and catastrophe. When they left Ollivander's, the alley was busier, midday crowds filling the cobblestones, the summer sky above it gray and English, and consistently committed to being gray. Harry held both of them, wand in one hand, lightsaber hand resting easy at his hip, and walked through the crowd of future classmates and their families with the natural ease of someone who did not require personal space to feel secure. Obi-Wan walked beside him and thought about what was coming. He'll know, Harry said. Voldemort? Yes, probably within hours. Does that change anything? It accelerates his interest in you, but his interest in you was already absolute. He stepped around a small child who had dropped an armful of books. What it does is give him information, that you've emerged, that you found the wand, that you're going to Hogwarts. He paused. He'll move through Quirrell faster. Quirrell, Harry said, the professor I felt in the alley. Defense against the dark arts. He went looking for Voldemort 2 years ago and found something other than what he expected. He glanced sideways. He is not a bad man. He is a frightened man who made a catastrophic decision and is now controlled by it. Harry looked at him. Can he be helped? I don't know. The possession it's not like anything I've encountered precisely. It may be too complete. He held Harry's gaze. Do you understand what I'm telling you? That he might not be savable, Harry said, and that I need to make decisions accordingly. Yes, Harry was quiet for a moment. That's the worst kind of situation, when someone's a victim and also the problem. Most real situations are like that. Obi-Wan stopped at the edge of the alley where it met the leaky cauldron. Moral clarity is a luxury that the Force provides very rarely. You'll need to make judgment calls in real time, with incomplete information, while things are moving fast. I know I want to say something, and I want you to let me finish before you respond. Harry's chin tilted up slightly. Go ahead. Dumbledore is not your enemy. He is a complicated ally with his own agenda and a structural tendency towards sacrificing the specific for the general. He will want to manage you. He will try to keep information from you when he believes the timing isn't right, and he will believe this more often than you'd like. He held his gaze. But he loves that world and those people in that school with a completeness that is real, and he has fought for them in ways that cost him. Give him credit for that even when he frustrates you. Harry absorbed this. And trust your own read of things. Your instincts are good. They'll be better in a year. You are not going into that school to win. You're going to learn and to be present and to be someone that the people around you can genuinely count on. He paused. That matters more than any strategic objective. You're worried about me, Harry said. Not about whether I can handle it, about whether I'll be happy, Obi-Wan said. I want you to be happy. I am aware that is an extremely un-Jedi thing to say. Harry looked at him for a moment. Then he smiled, the full one, the one that was entirely his own, that owed nothing to the photographs or the history or the prophecy. You've wanted to say that for years. I've wanted to say it for 11 years, Obi-Wan said. It's taken me this long to stop arguing myself out of it. They stood there in the grey London air with the noise of Diagon Alley behind them, and then Harry laughed, short and real, and turned toward the leaky cauldron and the journey home. On the 1st of September, platform 9 3/4 opened and closed, and the Hogwarts Express began its long northern run. Obi-Wan stood on the platform until the train's tail disappeared, the steam thinning in the cold air, and then stood there a moment longer in the sudden quiet of the emptied platform. He had put Harry on the train. He had packed his trunk, the lightsaber in its case, the wand in its holster, the photograph of his parents and the letter from his mother at the bottom where they had always lived, the books and the spare robes and the one small carved wooden toy that was not on any school supply list. He had said, standing on the platform, be yourself. He had meant it. Harry had said at the window as the train prepared to move, I'll write. He had been at that moment visibly excited, which was the right thing to be, and Obi-Wan had been glad of it. He looked at the empty tracks for one more moment. Then he reached into the Force and felt, far away and getting farther, the warm, certain presence of Harry Potter, not afraid, not performing, just himself and completely ready. He let out a slow breath. Then he turned and walked back through the barrier and back through London, and found the thin place between worlds and stepped through it, back to the desert, back to the hut, back to the long, patient dark of Tatooine, where the stars came out all at once, and the night was cold and quiet and full of a new kind of waiting. Chapter 4. The Living Force. The Sorting Hat took one look inside Harry Potter's head and went very quiet. Not the considering kind of quiet, the kind it used for the students it genuinely had to think about, the hat stalls who sat on the stool for minutes while it debated the competing claims of their character. This was a different quality of silence. The hat had sorted 4,000 students in 1,000 years and had developed, across that considerable span, a thorough taxonomy of human minds. It knew ambition and courage and wit and loyalty in all their variations and gradations, and it sorted them with the practiced ease of something that had been doing one job for a very long time and was good at it. It had never sat on a head quite like this one. The great hall was full. 140 students at 4 long tables, candles floating above them in their famous clusters, the ceiling open to the Scottish September sky with its early stars, the whole thing exactly as described in every piece of written material Harry had encountered, and also completely different in the way that experience is always completely different from description. He sat on the stool with the hat pulled down over his forehead and waited, because Obi-Wan had taught him that waiting was not passivity, it was patience, and patience was a tool. "Well," said the hat inside his head. "Hello," Harry said back because it seemed polite. "You can hear me clearly." "Yes." "Most students hear me as a kind of impression, a suggestion. They don't hold a conversation. I'm not most students." "No," the hat said slowly. "No, you are absolutely not." Another pause, and Harry felt it doing what he supposed it did, reading him, turning him over, looking at the angles. He let it. He wasn't hiding anything. "You have been trained, yes, in something very old, older than this school, older than the magic I know, a beat, and you have the magic too, both things together." "I've never, neither has anyone else, as far as I can tell," Harry said. The hat made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "Your courage is real. Not performed real, the kind that comes from knowing yourself rather than not knowing what should frighten you. You have your mother's heart and your father's nerve and something else entirely that didn't come from either of them. I know where it came from. The old man in the desert. Yes, he loves you." Harry didn't answer that, but the hat felt the answer anyway because it was in everything else. "You could be anything," the hat said, "any house. Genuinely, there are students I sort because one quality overwhelms the others. With you, the qualities are so integrated it's almost impossible to separate them. The courage isn't despite the intelligence. The loyalty isn't separate from the strategic capacity. It paused, searching. You're coherent. Most 11-year-olds are a collection of competing impulses. You are not. Should I be worried about that? Probably not. It might make you difficult to understand. People manage, Harry said. I imagine they do. The hat settled. Where do you want to go? Harry thought about it. He'd thought about it before on the train briefly and dismissed it as premature. He thought about it now properly. Slytherin would be interesting and was probably the house that expected him least, which had a tactical appeal, but he didn't think in primarily tactical terms about things that would define his daily life, so that was out. Ravenclaw had merit. He valued knowledge deeply and unambiguously, but there was something about the way the Force moved through him that was specifically not about the accumulation of knowledge for its own sake. It was about knowledge as an act of connection, which was different. He thought about his mother. He thought about what Obi-Wan had told him she was. Gryffindor, he thought. Yes, the hat agreed with what sounded like satisfaction. That's where the brave ones go. And the stubborn ones. And the ones who make things considerably more complicated than they need to be, but in the right direction. Gryffindor, the hat shouted to the hall. The Gryffindor table erupted. Harry pulled the hat off, handed it back to the severe-faced professor who had been managing the ceremony, and walked to the table and sat down, and was immediately subjected to the social experience of being surrounded by people who had heard his name their entire lives. It was, he had to admit, a lot. The first week established several things. The magical world had been telling the story of Harry Potter for 10 years. The story was a baby, a sacrifice, a curse that rebounded, a scar, survival. The story was the boy who lived, the symbol, the child who had done something impossible and would do it again when it mattered. The story was tragic, humble, grateful to exist. The story required a particular Harry Potter, quiet, slightly overwhelmed, made small by destiny rather than larger. The Hogwarts population was, therefore, not entirely sure what to do with the actual one. He wasn't unfriendly. He was, in fact, genuinely warm. That wasn't an act, had never been an act, was as natural to him as breathing, the quality in his Force presence that had been there from the first night in the hut and had only deepened. He liked people. He was curious about them. He asked questions and remembered the answers, and his attention was the kind of attention that made people feel, afterward, that they'd been genuinely seen rather than processed. But he also didn't perform humility he didn't feel, and he didn't compress his actual capability into a smaller shape, because the room might find the real size uncomfortable. And when someone said something incorrect, he said so, politely, with his specific reasoning, and waited for the argument with the confidence of someone who had been having good arguments since age 5. Ron Weasley sat next to him at the sorting feast, and decided within 10 minutes that Harry was the most interesting person he had ever met, which he communicated by talking about chess and older brothers, and the unforgivable mediocrity of Chudley Cannon's current offense without pause for approximately 40 minutes. Harry asked good questions. Ron answered them. By the time pudding arrived, they were in a thorough discussion of magical game theory that had drawn in 2 other first years and the attention of a prefect who had a strong opinion about chess. Hermione Granger sat across from them at breakfast on the second day, introduced herself with the brisk efficiency of someone who had prepared an introduction, stated her academic goals for the year, and then looked at Harry with an expression that said she had expected something and was performing rapid recalibration. "You've already read the textbooks," she said. "Most of them," Harry said, "plus supplementary materials." "Which ones?" he told her. Her eyes went slightly wide at 2 of the titles, which were not on any recommended list because they were not formally part of the curriculum and required either specialized knowledge or a Jedi Master with research connections to locate. "Where did you get those?" "Long story." She looked at him for a moment. "You're not at all what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Something." She stopped herself. He appreciated that she stopped herself because it showed she had noticed the problem with the sentence she'd started. "I'm not sure. Something less prepared." "I had a good teacher," Harry said. "Are you going to eat that toast?" She handed him the toast. They argued about the efficacy of the Wingardium Leviosa wrist motion for 20 minutes, which was the beginning of a friendship. Potions was Professor Snape. Obi-Wan had mentioned Severus Snape carefully and specifically, had told him about a boy who had loved Lily Evans and lost her, and had spent the years since in a state of grief so compressed it had transformed into something that functioned mostly as cruelty. Had told him that Snape would dislike him on sight because of his father, and that Snape had also done things of real courage at real cost that deserved acknowledgement even when he was being actively unpleasant. Had told him, "Be patient, be respectful, do not retaliate for the things he says about James because Snape's grief is real even if his expression of it is not your problem to absorb." Harry had listened to all of this and had said, "I'll try." Snape swept into the dungeon classroom on the 3rd day and looked at the assembled first years with the expression of a man who had been repeatedly disappointed by first years and had developed the capacity to be disappointed preemptively. He went through his introductory speech, "I can teach you to bewitch the mind, ensnare the senses," with the practiced precision of someone who had given the speech 40 times and still meant it, which Harry noted and found interesting. Then Snape's eyes landed on him. Harry met them. He didn't look away and he didn't harden his expression. He just met Snape's black gaze with the same attention he gave everything, and what Snape found there was apparently not what he was looking for, because something shifted briefly in his expression before it was controlled. "Mr. Potter," Snape said, "fame isn't everything." He paused. "What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" Harry could feel the trap, could feel it in the force and in the simple social texture of the question, could hear that it was designed to wrong foot, to establish hierarchy, to begin a narrative. He thought about Obi-Wan saying, "Be patient, be respectful." "The draught of living death," he said, "a powerful sleeping potion." The asphodel in particular has funerary associations in magical symbolism. The combination with wormwood is interesting from a historical standpoint, because both plants independently carry connotations of grief and memory, which may not be accidental if the potion's original compiler was working in the older tradition of sympathetic ingredient logic. Snape stared at him. The classroom was very quiet. Harry kept his expression neutral. He hadn't done that to perform. He had said what he knew because the question had been asked, and the fuller answer was more interesting than the short one. He was not trying to win anything. "Where did you learn the sympathetic ingredient framework?" Snape said. His voice had changed. The theatrical contempt was still there, but underneath it something had sharpened. "Background reading," Harry said. "I can give you the reference if it would be useful." Another pause. Snape moved on. He didn't praise him. That was clearly not something that was going to happen, but he also didn't pursue the dismissive thread he'd been pulling. He moved on and taught, and Harry paid attention and took notes and performed every practical with the focused precision of someone who treated a new skill as a problem worth solving properly. At the end of class, Snape collected their notes. When he handed Harry's back, there was a single mark on it, not a grade, a question mark, drawn beside the sympathetic ingredient paragraph with a sharpness that could have been irritation or could have been something else. Ron, collecting his own notes, leaned over. "What was that? He doesn't know what to make of me yet," Harry said. "Most people don't," Hermione said from his other side in the tone of someone stating an observation. Harry smiled. "I know." Flying lessons happened in the second week, and they happened the way certain things happened around Harry. Cleanly, inevitably, with results that were clear enough that nobody could pretend they hadn't occurred. Madame Hooch set them on their brooms, and Harry stood beside his and let the force run down through the handle and felt the broom respond, felt the enchantment in it, the way it was alive in the magical frequency that Harry had been navigating his whole life, and the broom seemed to feel him back because it rose before she'd told them to mount. He caught it, gripped it, mounted in one motion. Hooch was looking at him. He shrugged slightly, which was not the most instructive response but was the honest one. The flight itself was the first time Harry had felt anything like this since the roof of the hut, the sensation of open air and speed, and the force spreading out around him in all directions without a ceiling, the broom under him responding to intention as much as physical movement, the autumn Scottish sky enormous and gray and cold and perfect. He went up fast because he wanted to know the top of it, leveled off at a height that made the castle below look like a model, hung there for a moment in the cold air, with the wind doing something serious to his hair, and the force running clean and bright in every direction. He went back down because Hooch was going to have a problem with this, and there was no point in being difficult about it. She had a look on her face when he landed, the look that he was beginning to recognize, which was the look of someone recategorizing rapidly. "Mr. Potter," she said. "I know," he said. "I was careful." "You were," she stopped. "Have you flown before?" "Not on a broom, other things." Hooch looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "I'm going to speak to Professor McGonagall," which was not quite an accusation, and not quite a compliment, and he appreciated the honesty of it. Neville Longbottom had broken his wrist in the meanwhile, which was the genuinely urgent thing, and Harry helped steady him until Hooch had him sorted, one hand on his shoulder and a small, careful push of calm through the force, not enough to be noticeable, just enough to help. Neville, who was pale and shaking, looked up at him. "Thanks," he said. "I don't know what you did, but thanks." "You're all right," Harry said. "I'm not really," Neville said, looking at his wrist. "Number, but you will be." Neville blinked at him. The force showed Harry something about Neville Longbottom that was interesting, a deep well of something that wasn't quite confidence but was its raw material, currently buried under approximately 10 years of being told he was inadequate. It would come out eventually. It needed room. Harry made a note of it. The Quidditch conversation with Professor McGonagall happened the next day. She brought him to the Quidditch captain, Oliver Wood, who shook his hand with the focused intensity of someone who had just received an early birthday present and was trying not to visibly vibrate. "Seeker," Wood said. "You're a natural seeker." "I'm a natural flyer," Harry said. "Seeker specifically might take some work. You'd be the youngest house player in a century." "I know." He'd looked it up. "I'd like to try." He became the Gryffindor Seeker within the week. He attended his first practice and would put him through drills, and he was excellent at most of them and needed work on too, and he said so, and Wood looked at him like he'd said something unexpected and useful. "Most players," Wood said, hovering beside him between runs, "don't tell me what they need work on." "Why not?" "Because they think I'll." Wood paused. "I don't know, honestly. If I don't tell you, you can't help me fix it," Harry said. "And if we can't fix it before the Slytherin match, that's worse than telling you now." He turned the broom. Again, Wood ran him again. They went until the light was completely gone and the castle was lit amber from every window and the air was too cold for comfort, and when they landed, Wood was grinning the grin of someone whose strategic problems had just simplified significantly. "Gryffindor might actually win the cup," Wood said. "Let's not get ahead of it," Harry said. "You're 11. "I know, that's why we're not getting ahead of it." October moved toward November and Harry moved through Hogwarts and the Force moved through him, and the world layered itself onto him with the gathering density of real life, friends and classes, and the particular intimacy of living in close quarters with 60 other people your own age, which was entirely unlike living in a stone hut with one Jedi Master. He liked it, in the way he liked most complex things, not simply, not without reservation, but with his whole attention. He and Hermione studied together every evening, and she was the best study partner he had encountered because she was genuinely rigorous, and because she argued back, and arguing back with someone who knew what they were talking about was the fastest way to learn. Ron played chess against him every night after dinner, and Harry lost more often than he won because chess was a particular kind of thinking, and he was still developing it, and losing to Ron was productive because Ron was genuinely gifted and didn't gloat, he explained, which was significantly more valuable. He wrote to Obi-Wan twice a week. The letters went through an arrangement he and Obi-Wan had worked out before September 1st, a Muggle post box in Edinburgh, collected by a contact who carried them to the thin place, a method that was clumsy and slow and entirely worth it. Obi-Wan's letters back were dense and specific and covered everything from magical theory to Force meditations to, on one occasion, a detailed analysis of Quidditch strategy that demonstrated he had done rather more research on the subject than Harry had expected. The seeker position Obi-Wan had written in his precise, slightly formal hand is structurally interesting because it decouples individual excellence from collective play in a way that most team sports do not. I suspect you will need to resist the temptation to treat the role as independent. The snitch ends the game, but the score when you catch it is controlled by everyone else. Watch your teammates as carefully as you watch the field. Harry had read that twice and then gone to Wood with a specific conversation about defensive formations, and Wood had looked at him like he was something occasionally worrying and consistently useful. He was happy. He had not fully anticipated being this happy, which felt like a good sign about his own self-awareness. What he was also watching, because the other thing that October brought, steady and thickening as the cold, was the presence of Quirrell. He had felt it the first time in Diagon Alley, that dark attachment, parasitic and old, the specific quality of something that had survived past its natural endpoint through terrible means. At Hogwarts it was closer, and he felt it every time Quirrell passed in a corridor, felt the stutter of it, the way the man himself was perpetually frightened underneath the stuttering performance of a frightened man. Quirrell was afraid of his own shadow in a way that was genuine, and Harry understood why, because whatever was wearing his skull had teeth and used them. He had not told Dumbledore yet. He had considered it carefully and had decided to wait and understand better what he was dealing with. He had told Hermione and Ron in the second week. Ron had said, "Are you sure?" Harry had said, "Yes." Ron had thought about it and said, "Right then." Hermione had asked 6 specific follow-up questions and had then gone to the library, and had come back 3 hours later with a comprehensive list of defensive measures available to first-year students against possession-adjacent entities, none of which were part of the curriculum. This was, Harry thought, exactly the right response from both of them. He had also, through careful force reading conducted at safe distance over several weeks, developed a picture of what exactly was attached to Quirrell, and the picture matched everything Dumbledore had said in the tea shop, and added detail that Dumbledore had either not known or had withheld. The presence on Quirrell's skull was not full Voldemort. It was a fragment, diminished and vicious, kept alive through a combination of unicorn blood and a proximity to an object of power that was somewhere in the castle. Harry had felt the object. Enormous, concentrated magic deep below them in the lower chambers of a place that had substantial lower chambers. The Philosopher's Stone. He'd found the reference in a library book. The connection was not subtle once you were looking for it. He had written to Obi-Wan about all of this. Obi-Wan's response had been thorough and had ended with, "Do not go after it alone. Observe, document, and let Dumbledore know what you know." There is a difference between being capable of handling something and it being your responsibility to do so unilaterally. Harry had written back, "I know, but if Quirrell moves, the timeline shortens." Obi-Wan's response to that had been a single line, "I know, I'm watching the thin place." The troll happened on Halloween, and it happened because Quirrell staged it, and it happened while Hermione was in the bathroom. Harry felt it before the announcement, felt the shift in the castle's atmosphere, the way collective panic moved through a crowd like a current, and felt Quirrell's satisfaction at the center of it like a dark note struck clearly under the noise. He was already moving when the prefects started shouting for everyone to go to the dormitories, because Hermione was not in the Great Hall, and there was a 12-foot mountain troll somewhere in the castle, and the Force was extremely clear about the direction. Ron came with him, which was not a surprise, because Ron's response to the information that a troll was in the dungeon had been, briefly, to go pale and then to stand up and follow Harry, which was exactly Ron. They found the girls' bathroom. They found the troll. The troll was impressive in the specific way that something the size of a small vehicle and significantly less intelligent is impressive, massive, stinking, genuinely dangerous to anyone who was not moving at the right angles or thinking at the right speed. Harry assessed it in approximately 2 seconds. The troll's weakness was its size. It was too big for the space, which meant its swing radius was limited by the walls, and its intelligence was too low for it to adapt when the obvious target stopped being where it expected. It led with visual tracking and momentum, and it was very slow to change direction. He put himself between Hermione and the troll and drew his lightsaber, not the wand. The wand would have worked, he knew 4 spells that would have been relevant, but the lightsaber was faster, and he knew it better, and the troll had a club and was not going to respond to a threat assessment pause. The blue-violet blade ignited in the dim bathroom light, and the troll stopped. Just stopped, stared at it. Most things, faced with a sudden light source they had no framework for, stopped. Harry didn't let it recover. He moved left, drawing its attention, keeping the blade at a height that interrupted its visual tracking of Hermione, and said without turning around, "Hermione, door." He heard her move, heard Ron grab her arm, heard the bathroom door. The troll recovered. It swung the club and Harry stepped inside the swing, a motion he'd practiced 10,000 times in the Junland wastes, and that still required his full attention, because the troll was strong and fast in short bursts, and hit the wrist that held the club with the flat back of the blade, hard, not cutting, just impact and heat, and the troll dropped the club with a sound that shook the walls and reeled back and hit the opposite wall and brought a row of sinks off it. Harry was already at the door. Ron had Hermione in the corridor. She was white and shaking and entirely unhurt. Harry extinguished the lightsaber and looked at them both. "Everyone all right?" Ron said with the expression of someone whose mouth was still connected to a different brain from the one processing what he'd just seen. It stopped. It just stopped. "They're not smart," Harry said. "It didn't know what it was looking at. Gave us about 4 seconds. He looked at Hermione. "You're all right?" "I'm all right," she said. She looked at the lightsaber at his hip and then at his face. "You knew where I was?" "Yes." "How?" He considered the question and the corridor and the arriving sound of professors in the distance. "I'll explain properly later. We should look like we barely got out of this." "We barely got out of this," Ron said. "I mean on my end that was pretty much entirely terrifying." "Then look terrified," Harry said. "I don't have to try," Ron said. The professors arrived. McGonagall looked at the 3 of them and then at the destruction visible through the bathroom door, the troll, knocked unconscious by the wall it had hit, the debris, the extinguished blade mark across what had been a sink, and her face went through several distinct phases very quickly. Quirrell saw the lightsaber burn mark and his expression did something complicated. Harry watched Quirrell watch the mark. He told Dumbledore at the end of November, not everything. What he told him was, the troll was staged, Quirrell staged it, and the thing attached to Quirrell is using him to get to whatever is below the 3rd floor corridor. He said it in Dumbledore's office with the directness he used for things that needed directness, and Dumbledore listened to all of it with his hands folded on his desk and his eyes very bright. When Harry finished, Dumbledore said, "You have felt all of this through the Force." "Yes." "For how long?" "Since September 1st. The basic presence since Diagon Alley in July." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "You didn't come to me. I needed to understand it first. You trusted your own assessment over mine." "I trusted my own assessment, yes," Harry said. "That's not the same as distrust of yours. I wanted to be able to tell you something specific rather than alert you to something vague, because a vague alert is less useful than a specific one." He held Dumbledore's gaze. "I also wanted to know what it was before I told anyone, including you." "Why?" "Because you knew about Quirrell already," Harry said, "didn't you?" The pause was brief but present. "I had suspicions. About Voldemort specifically, which means you placed something down there knowing there was a possibility he'd try to get to it." He kept his voice even. "I wanted to understand why before I had this conversation, because the why changes what the right response is." Dumbledore studied him for a long moment. "You're 11 years old," he said, but not dismissively, it was almost a question. "I've been told," Harry said. "The stone is bait," Dumbledore said slowly as though deciding while speaking. "I will not confirm or deny the specifics, but the arrangement below is designed to be apparent, to draw him. To reveal his method and his resources while he is still too diminished to be truly dangerous. And if he gets to it, he won't. If he does, there are measures," Dumbledore said. "Layers. The final one is not mechanical." Harry looked at him. "Is it me?" The silence that followed was the informative kind. Dumbledore did not lie. He simply didn't answer immediately, and the space was everything. "Not in the way you might fear," Dumbledore said carefully. "Not this year. Your role this year is simply to be a student." "My role this year is to be ready," Harry said. "Which I am." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. "The love your mother placed in you," he said quietly. "Do you feel it?" "I feel it all the time," Harry said. "It's part of the Force the way I experience it. It's structural. It is a weapon," Dumbledore said, "that he cannot touch. It is literally toxic to him." "I know." "Physical contact." Harry thought about Quirrell, about the attachment, about the question he'd asked in October about whether Quirrell could be helped. I understand what you're telling me. If he reaches the stone, he won't get past me, Harry said, flatly, factually, without performance. If it comes to it, he won't get past me. Dumbledore looked at him with an expression that was complicated in ways that Harry was still learning to read, relief and grief, and something that was specifically about Harry's parents and specifically about guilt, all of it layered under the composed surface. I believe you, he said softly. Harry stood to leave. Harry, Dumbledore's voice. The protections below the challenges are designed for an adult wizard. They will not significantly challenge you. I know. I'm telling you because I want you to understand you were always going to be ready, in whatever form you arrived in. Some things, Dumbledore said with the weight of a man who had made a study of inevitability, are true regardless of the path. Harry considered that. That's a generous thing to believe, he said. I hope you're right. He left. It happened in June. He knew it was going to happen because the Force had been building to it for weeks, that specific gathering quality, events drawing together toward a point, a narrative gravity he had learned to feel. The chess game was sabotaged. Quirrell's grip on coherence was loosening. Something in the lower levels had changed its quality, the dark presence pressing against the defenses with an urgency that hadn't been there in September. Harry went down with Ron and Hermione, and the three of them moved through the protections the way they moved through most things, together, each doing the part they were best at, no time wasted on argument about who should be in front. Ron played chess. Chess against enchanted pieces the size of people, and he played it with the focused clarity Harry had watched him develop across a year of nightly games, and when it required sacrifice, Ron made the sacrifice and the board opened, and Harry looked back at his friend on the stone floor and felt something pull in his chest. I'll be fine, Ron said. He said it like he believed it. Harry believed him. Hermione had already solved the potion puzzle, was already handing him the right vial. It's a forward barrier, she said. Small vial enough for one. Go back, Harry said. Both of you go back. Harry, you can't help in there. He met her eyes. But you can get help. You know who to contact. He'd given her Obi-Wan's contact method months ago for exactly this contingency. She looked at him for a long moment with those sharp eyes that missed nothing, and she said, Be careful. Tell Obi-Wan I was very careful, Harry said, even if I wasn't. She made a sound that was mostly involuntary and had tears in it, which she would have been irritated by if she'd been less scared, and then she turned and went, because she trusted his assessment, and she was brave enough to act on trust. Harry drank the potion and walked through the fire. Quirrell was already in the room. The mirror of Eris stood against the far wall, enormous and ornate, and Quirrell stood before it with the stillness of someone being directed from inside, and when Harry walked through the fire the man turned and something in his face went from focused to unsettled. Potter, Quirrell said, then quieter, speaking to something else. I see. Hello, Professor, Harry said. He kept his voice even. He took in the room in the first 3 seconds. One exit. The fire, the mirror between him and Quirrell, the room size, Quirrell's posture, which was wrong, the wrongness of a man being piloted rather than moving on his own. The dark presence was overwhelming this close, loud and vicious and ancient and furious. You shouldn't be here, Quirrell said. Probably not, Harry agreed. Where's the stone? Quirrell stared at him. Then the stutter came back, not the false stutter, but something genuine, the interface between two competing minds in one body. The Master knows you, he has felt you. I've felt him, Harry said. Tell him hello. Don't, Quirrell said, and this time the voice was different, lower, colder, with a resonance in it that put every hair on Harry's arms upright. Not Quirrell's voice, the thing wearing Quirrell. Don't treat this as small, boy. I'm not treating it as small, Harry said. He hadn't moved. I'm treating it as handled. The voice made a sound. Brave like your father. He was also brave. It didn't help him. No, Harry said simply. It didn't. He let that land for a second. It didn't help him because he didn't know what was coming and he was protecting my mum. Those circumstances don't apply right now. You are 11 years old. You've been saying that a lot. It keeps being true. Harry looked at the mirror. You want to use me to get the stone. Dumbledore's design, the mirror gives it to someone who wants to find it but not use it. You think I qualify. You can see something in the mirror, the voice said. Not a question. I can feel it. I can see something in the mirror, Harry agreed. He didn't approach it. I'm not going to use it for you. I can take it by force. From me, from you. The Force was very clear on what happened next. He didn't plan it. He didn't calculate it. He simply felt Quirrell's body begin to move, felt the decision made by the presence inside him, and he was already moving, the lightsaber igniting in the same motion, blue-violet in the dark room, not attacking but between them, standing on his ground. Quirrell stopped. You felt that, Harry said. The dark presence knew what a lightsaber was, knew what it meant. Felt the kyber crystal singing in its frequency, and felt the force around Harry, and was still for 2 full seconds in a way it had not been still before. "You are not only what I was told," the voice said. "No," Harry said. "Who trained you? Someone better than you." The presence moved through Quirrell like a tide, and what came next was not a lunge but something subtler and more dangerous. Quirrell's hands extending, a dark working in the air between them, something in a frequency that was specifically magical and specifically designed to bind and overwhelm rather than destroy, because the presence couldn't afford to destroy Harry, not here, not with the stone's conditions still in play. Harry cut through it with the lightsaber and simultaneously pushed through the force, not an aggressive push but a presence, a state, the full weight of 11 years of morning meditations on a desert roof, and the force that ran through him like a river and the specific quality that Lily Potter had built into his bones, and reached out with one hand and touched Quirrell's wrist. The reaction was immediate and total. Quirrell screamed, not with pain or not only pain. The dark presence burned away from the contact point like fog from light, and Harry felt it in his own hand, the love frequency, the structural thing Dumbledore had described, working exactly as described, and Quirrell crumpling, and the presence abandoning Quirrell as the most efficient retreat, dispersing into the air with a sound like a door slamming very far away. The room went quiet. Quirrell was on the floor. Harry knelt beside him. The man was alive, barely, the cost of being a vessel for something that consumed its hosts, and his eyes were his own now, frightened and exhausted and present. "Is it?" Quirrell said. His voice was wrecked. "It's gone," Harry said. He put one hand on the man's chest and pushed calm through the force, careful and steady. "Stay still." I thought. Quirrell's eyes were filling. "I only wanted to prove." "I know," Harry said. "I know what you wanted." He held the man's gaze. "It's over now. I'm dying." Harry felt it. The force was clear. The vessel wasn't built to survive what had lived in it for a year and leave. He didn't lie to him. "I know." Is it very bad?" "No," Harry said gently, honestly. "The force doesn't feel like bad. It just," he stopped, found the words. "It just opens." Quirrell looked at him with the eyes of a man surprised by comfort. Then he exhaled, long and slow, and the force released him. Harry stayed kneeling on the floor for a moment, then he stood. His hand was fine, no injury, just warmth. He looked at the mirror, still standing against the wall, and he looked at Quirrell, and he looked at his own reflection in the mirror's face. In the reflection he was holding the stone. He blinked. He was not holding the stone. He looked down. The stone was in his pocket, which it had not been a moment ago. Dumbledore's design. It had worked exactly as planned. He thought about that, about a man who had placed trust in a piece of magic that rewarded selflessness, and he thought about what Dumbledore had known and had chosen to trust, and he found he could not be entirely angry about it. He sat down beside the mirror and waited for Dumbledore, and the force settled around him in the particular way it settled after something significant had resolved, warm and deep and quiet, the way the desert got quiet after a sandstorm. He realized, entirely unhurt. He thought, Obi-Wan is going to be relieved. Then he thought, Obi-Wan is going to lecture me about risk assessment for at least 40 minutes. Then he smiled at the ceiling of the underground chamber and waited, with the patience of someone who had grown up in the desert and knew how to wait, for what came next. Chapter 5. What remains. The hospital wing smelled of dittany and clean linen, and the particular stillness of a place where time moves differently, slower, more deliberate, as though the building itself has decided that recovery cannot be rushed and has adjusted its atmosphere accordingly. Harry had been there for 3 days. Not because he was significantly injured. Madame Pomfrey had examined him with the focused urgency of someone who had been told a student had faced Voldemort, and was applying that information to her professional obligations with considerable thoroughness, and had found, after an examination that was both extensive and slightly insulted in its tone, insulted because Harry appeared to be fine, which was not what the situation called for, a mild case of magical exhaustion and a residual contact burn on his palm that was already fading. She had kept him anyway. 3 days full rest, no visitors before noon, which was a rule that had lasted approximately 14 hours before Ron and Hermione had arrived at 11:47 on the first morning, and Madame Pomfrey had looked at them and made the calculation that removing them would cost more energy than it was worth. "You're sure you're all right?" Ron said. He was sitting backward on the chair beside the bed, arms folded on the back, chin on his arms, looking at Harry with the expression he used when he was trying to determine if someone was telling the truth and was applying more effort than usual. "I've told you 4 times. You've told me 4 times that you're fine. That's different from being all right." Harry looked at him. Ron had, across a year of close proximity, developed an understanding of the difference between Harry's states that was precise and largely accurate and occasionally inconvenient. "I'm all right," Harry said. "The man died," Hermione said quietly. She was sitting on the other bed with a book she had not opened, right in front of you. "Yes, that's not, you don't just—" "I know," Harry said. "I know it's not nothing." He looked at the window, the late morning light coming through it gray and Scottish. Quirrell made a choice, a bad one. He paid for it, and it wasn't the payment he deserved, because the thing using him was the thing that made the choice what it was. He paused. "I'm sad about it. I'll be sad about it for a while. That's different from being broken by it." Hermione looked at him for a long moment and then put the book down and said, "Obi-Wan taught you that." "He taught me the framework," Harry said. "I'm doing the rest." She nodded. It was the nod she used when she decided to accept something provisionally and would return to it later when she had more data, which was her version of faith, and Harry had learned to value it exactly as it was. Ron said, "Dumbledore came by this morning. Before you were awake." Harry turned, and just looked at you for a bit, didn't say anything. Ron's expression was hard to read. He looked, he stopped searching. Old, in a way he didn't look before. Harry thought about that. Thought about a man who had planned for one outcome for a decade and had watched a different one arrive and was still processing which was better. "I'll talk to him when he's ready. He's the headmaster, shouldn't he be? He'll come when he's ready," Harry said again. "He has things to work out." Ron looked at him with the expression he sometimes wore when Harry said something that required a recalibration of what 11-year-olds were supposed to be like. He'd been wearing it fairly regularly since September. "Right," he said. "Chess." "Chess," Harry agreed. Dumbledore came on the afternoon of the second day. He came alone, which was notable, and he came without his usual arrangement of cheerful benevolence, which was more notable. He sat in the chair beside the bed and folded his hands in his lap and looked at Harry with the direct gaze he used when he had decided not to perform. "How are you feeling?" he said. "Better than I should be, apparently," Harry said. "Madame Pomfrey is professionally offended." "She is often professionally offended," Dumbledore said. "She believes the world should produce more dramatic injuries to justify her expertise." The ghost of a smile. "It passes." They sat for a moment in the specific quiet of two people who have things to say and are deciding the order. "Quirrell," Dumbledore said. "Yes, I want to." He stopped, restarted. "I placed him in that position knowing what I suspected, knowing that if Voldemort was indeed attached to him, the year would eventually force a confrontation." He looked at Harry steadily. "I told myself the layers of protection made that confrontation manageable, that a student would never reach the final chamber. But you knew I would," Harry said. "Not an accusation, an observation. I hoped you wouldn't need to. I thought—" Dumbledore paused and something crossed his face that was painful to look at directly, so Harry looked at it sideways, the way you look at something very bright. "I thought the layers would hold. I thought Quirrell would be contained before it reached that point. He wasn't. Number quiet. And you went down anyway. And you handled it in a way I could not have planned for and did not predict, and the outcome was—" He stopped again. "The outcome was the best possible one given the circumstances. Better, in several ways, than my own contingency. You had a contingency for me being down there." "I had a contingency for a student being down there," Dumbledore said carefully. "It was less elegant than what actually occurred." Harry looked at him. He thought about the months of watching and measuring this man, the letters to Obi-Wan trying to articulate what Dumbledore was, the architecture of him, the way his care and his strategy were so thoroughly integrated that separating them was like separating color from light. "You were going to come yourself," Harry said. "Yes. You felt me go through the trapdoor. I felt a significant force disturbance." He paused, caught. "A magical disturbance. Yes, I came back from London as quickly as I could." "You were fast," Harry said. 15 minutes after Quirrell died. "Not fast enough." "Fast enough," Harry said. "Quirrell was already gone. I was sitting on the floor. Nothing was on fire." He paused. "Much." Dumbledore looked at him. "You are remarkably composed for someone who—" "I'm not composed," Harry said. "I'm practicing." He met the old man's eyes. "There's a difference. Obi-Wan told me the first year that composure under pressure doesn't mean you're not feeling things. It means you've decided the feeling doesn't get to drive. You can feel it and keep moving. Both things." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "He sounds," he said carefully, "like a remarkable man." "He is," Harry said without qualification. Another pause. Then Dumbledore said, "He's here." Harry went still. "He arrived this morning," Dumbledore said. "He came through whatever method he uses and presented himself at the front gates, which I found interesting because the front gates are warded against uninvited apparition and several other forms of unusual entry, and he simply walked through them." A pause. "My wards did not stop him." They noticed him, which I found considerably more interesting. The Force doesn't negotiate with wards the way magic does, Harry said. He was already pushing the hospital blanket back. Where is he? Harry, where is he? Dumbledore looked at him for a moment. My office, he said, though I suspect given, the door to the hospital wing opened. Obi-Wan Kenobi stood in the doorway. He looked the same as he always looked, desert-worn robes that he had apparently not changed for the visit, beard slightly longer than Harry remembered from March, the specific quality of stillness in him that was not stillness at all but was readiness arranged to look like rest. He looked at Harry across the room with the expression he used when he had been performing calculations and had arrived at a result he found acceptable, which on Obi-Wan looked very much like no expression at all. Harry crossed the room and Obi-Wan met him halfway, and that was it for approximately 30 seconds, Harry's face against the rough wool of Obi-Wan's shoulder, Obi-Wan's hand on the back of his head, the force between them settling like a held breath released. You're all right, Obi-Wan said. It was not a question, but it needed saying. I'm all right, Harry said, muffled. The composure letter, Obi-Wan said. You quoted it back to Dumbledore. How do you? He told me on the way up from the gates. He was, I think, slightly testing me. A pause. Also, the wards told him I was coming before I knocked, which is interesting because I was being moderately careful. Nothing about this castle is moderate, Harry said. He stepped back, looked up at him. Obi-Wan looked back and did the thing he did, the thorough, quiet examination that was not invasive but was complete, the force running over Harry like a hand checking for damage, gentle and practiced. When it found nothing serious, something in his shoulders moved a fraction. Dumbledore was still in his chair by the bed. He had watched all of this with an expression that was, Harry thought, the expression of a man revising something fundamental. Professor Dumbledore, Obi-Wan said, turning, thank you for sending word. You received it quickly, Dumbledore said. I was already on my way, Obi-Wan said. The Force moves faster than owls. Dumbledore's office was an extraordinary room. Harry had been in it once before, a brief conversation in October about Quidditch liability waivers, and had found it overwhelming in the way of places that have accumulated significance over centuries. The portraits on the walls were awake and paying attention. The shelves held instruments that moved of their own will and motivation. Fawkes the Phoenix was on his perch, and he looked at Obi-Wan with the alert interest of a creature that recognized something. Obi-Wan looked back at Fawkes with equal interest. Force bonded, Obi-Wan said, not to anyone in particular. He is a phoenix, Dumbledore said. They are connected in ways I've never fully understood to something larger than themselves. That's a reasonable description of the Force, Obi-Wan said. Harry sat beside him. Dumbledore settled behind his desk with the unhurried quality of a man who had been having significant conversations in this room for 40 years and had a feel for their rhythms. We should speak plainly, Obi-Wan said. I find that's usually best, Dumbledore agreed. Voldemort is not gone, Obi-Wan said. He is reduced and dispersed, but his connection to continued existence is more complex than a conventional death would produce. You know this. I do. And Harry knows you know this. He does, Harry said. Dumbledore looked between them. Something about the way they were sitting, the slight angle toward each other, the ease of it, the unconscious alignment, made his expression do something that he controlled before it finished. Yes, he said. Voldemort created anchors, objects bound to his life force. As long as they exist, he cannot die in the permanent sense. How many? Obi-Wan said. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. This is information I have been protecting carefully. I understand why, Obi-Wan said. I'm asking anyway. Several, Dumbledore said, the word careful to the point of architecture. And there's something else, Harry said. Both men looked at him. There's something else, Harry said again. Something you haven't said, something you've been not saying since the tea shop in Diagon Alley. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. I've felt it every time we talk. A closed door, something behind it that you believe I need but you haven't decided how to give me yet. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long time. Then he looked at Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan said, he deserves to know whatever it is. The timing is not yours to determine unilaterally, Obi-Wan said, not unkindly, completely without give. You have established this year that your protection, however well-intentioned, is not perfect. Harry is not diminished by that fact. He is, in fact, the reason the outcome of this year was survivable. He held Dumbledore's gaze. What is behind the door? Dumbledore sat with this for a long time. Outside the high windows, the Scottish sky was doing something dramatic with clouds, the light shifting through gray to gold and back again. Fawkes made a quiet sound on his perch. There is a piece of Voldemort's soul, Dumbledore said finally, that was placed in Harry on the night Lily died. An accident, it was not intended, and Voldemort does not know it. The curse rebounded and fractured his soul, and the fragment latched onto the nearest living vessel. He looked at Harry. You have been carrying a piece of him since you were 15 months old. The office was very quiet. Harry felt the information arrive. He had the experience, developed over years of Obi-Wan delivering uncomfortable truths, of allowing a hard thing to land without immediately trying to manage it. He let it land. He sat with it for several seconds, breathing, the force moving through him steady and present and entirely his own. That's what I've been feeling, Harry said slowly. In the force, there's always been a note that doesn't belong. I thought it was the scar. The scar is the entry point, Dumbledore said. But yes, can it be removed? Dumbledore's expression told him the answer before he spoke. I don't know, Dumbledore said. I believe I have theorized that it might require, he stopped. That it might require Harry to die, Obi-Wan said. The words were in the room, specific and cold and exactly what they were. Dumbledore said nothing, which was the answer. Harry looked at him. He looked at the old man who had spent a decade building a strategy around this moment, who had arranged everything, the Dursleys and the prophecy and the school and the stone and all of it, around the understanding that at some point Harry would need to walk into death willingly, and who had clearly not known what to do with a Harry who had arrived without the architecture of suffering that the original plan required. Were you going to tell me? Harry said. In your 7th year, Dumbledore said. When the time came, as late as possible, Harry said. As late as was necessary, Dumbledore said. The distinction mattered to him. Harry could hear it. Obi-Wan was very still beside him. Harry knew the specific quality of Obi-Wan's stillness when something had affected him significantly and he was containing it. The Force didn't lie, and right now Obi-Wan's Force presence had the quality of something held under pressure. He was furious. He was managing it with the discipline of 50 years of Jedi practice, but he was furious. Obi-Wan, Harry said quietly. I'm listening, Obi-Wan said. His voice was entirely level. Don't yet, Harry said, not dismissive. He simply knew the order that was needed. Obi-Wan breathed and waited. Harry looked at Dumbledore. I need you to understand something, he said. I'm not angry at you. I understand the calculation you made. I understand that you looked at what you knew and made the best plan you could with it, and that the plan required you to not tell me because knowing would change how I carried it. He paused. I think you were wrong about that, but I understand why you did it. Dumbledore looked at him with the expression of a man being more honestly addressed than he expected. What I need, Harry said, is for you to stop making unilateral decisions about what I can bear. Not because I'm always right about what I can bear, but because it's my life and my soul, literally, and I need to be part of the decisions about it. He held the old man's gaze. I'm not a piece on a board. I know you don't think of me as one, but the decisions you've been making only make sense if you treat me as one, and I need that to stop. The silence in the office had a particular quality now, the quality of something important shifting. Fawkes made a sound. One of the silver instruments on the shelf behind Dumbledore let out a single soft chime. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long time. Then he looked at Obi-Wan, and whatever he found there, the contained fury, the absolute stillness of a man who had spent 11 years in a desert grieving the cost of making exactly this mistake from the other direction, seemed to settle something. You're right, Dumbledore said. He said it simply and without qualification, and Harry heard the weight of it, a man of 80 years and extraordinary capability saying I was wrong without hedging it into a lesser shape, and it cost him something real, which was exactly what made it mean something. Thank you, Harry said. Now Obi-Wan spoke. His voice was measured and specific, the voice he used for things that needed precision. The soul fragment, he said. I have spent 11 years learning the intersection of the Force and magic. I will not accept the conclusion that removal requires Harry's death until every other option has been exhausted, documented, and genuinely tried. He looked at Dumbledore. That is not a request. I will research this myself if necessary, Obi-Wan said. I have access to knowledge bases that predate your magical tradition by several thousand years. I am not dismissing the difficulty. I am refusing to begin from the assumption of impossibility. A pause. Do you understand? Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Two old men, though old was a relative term, Obi-Wan barely past 60 and Dumbledore a century and a half, and between them a kind of recognition. The recognition of two people who had both, in their different ways and with their different tools, spent their lives making terrible choices in service of the people they were responsible for. I understand, Dumbledore said, and then, I would welcome your research. Good, Obi-Wan said. They stayed that night and the night after. Dumbledore gave Obi-Wan a guest room in the castle, with the matter-of-factness of someone who had been making accommodations for unexpected guests for decades. And Harry, released from the hospital wing on the morning of the 3rd day, with Madame Pomfrey's reluctant clearance, and a set of instructions she clearly believed would be ignored, found the two of them at breakfast in the Great Hall as though this were something that had always been the arrangement. The Great Hall at breakfast was its full social self, noise and motion, and the particular energy of 500 young people being alive very loudly. Obi-Wan sat at the staff table with a cup of tea he was drinking with the expression of someone being politely tolerant of the tea. McGonagall was beside him, and they appeared to be having a conversation about something that had made both of them sit slightly straighter, which Harry suspected was either military history or educational philosophy, and was possibly both. Ron appeared at Harry's elbow as he crossed to the Gryffindor table. "Is that your—" "Yes," Harry said. "He's been talking to McGonagall since 6 in the morning," Ron said. "She's been smiling." McGonagall smiles. "Not like that," Ron said. "Not the way she's smiling at him." "That's a real one." He looked genuinely unsettled. "It's strange." Harry looked up. McGonagall was making a point with a piece of toast, which was emphatic. Obi-Wan was listening with his full attention, which was his default mode and which Harry had observed throughout his life made people feel uniquely considered. "He does that," Harry said. "Listens in a way that makes you feel like what you're saying matters. People like it. Does he listen to you like that?" "Yes." Ron was quiet for a moment. "That must be yes," Harry said. They sat down. Hermione was already there with 3 books open, which was 2 more than were necessary at breakfast, but Harry had learned not to address this because it only made her defensive, and then she opened a 4th one on principle. "How do you feel?" she asked without looking up. "Like someone who had 3 days in the hospital wing," Harry said. "Fine. The soul fragment," she said. He looked at her. "You were listening. I was in the corridor outside Dumbledore's office." She did look up now, with the direct expression she used when she had done something technically inadvisable, and was owning it rather than apologizing for it. "I needed to know." He wasn't annoyed. He'd expected something like this from her. She approached danger to people she cared about the way she approached everything, with thorough research and the refusal to be kept at a comfortable distance. "What did you hear?" "Most of it." She set her book down. "I've already started looking into soul magic. Not Horcruxes specifically, because those texts are restricted, but the underlying theory. There are several branches of magical research that deal with soul fracture and contamination, and some of the medieval work is, Harry, there are theories about." "Hermione," he said. She stopped. "Good," he said. "Thank you. Later, though, not at breakfast." She looked at him for a moment, and the research urgency settled back below the surface into something quieter, and she picked up her pumpkin juice and said, "Fine. Later." And then, "Ron taught me chess. How's that going? I beat him last night." Ron made a sound from Harry's other side that suggested this was both true and still processing. "Good," Harry said. "Ron, she beat you." "She took 12 minutes, Ron said, with the tone of a man who has been genuinely surprised by someone's capability and is deciding whether to be annoyed or impressed. 12 minutes, she'd never played before. "I'd read 4 books, Hermione said. "You can't read chess, you can absolutely." Harry ate his breakfast while they argued, which was a sound he had come to associate with normalcy, and which had, he realized now, become one of the things he would miss over the summer. The hall around them was loud and ordinary, the end-of-year energy building toward exams and going home, and the specific lightness of a year completed. Through the tall windows, the Scottish summer was making its tentative claim on the sky, actual blue visible between the clouds. He thought about the soul fragment. He thought about it with the same careful deliberateness he'd used in the room beneath the school, waiting. Not with fear, with the same quality of assessment he'd given the troll in the bathroom, the same 2-second inventory of variables and constraints and available tools. It was there. It had been there since he was 1 year old. It had not stopped him from being himself. It had not stopped anything. It was a problem, and problems got examined and addressed, and this one would take longer than most, but it was not a reason to stop moving. He thought about Obi-Wan saying, "Every other option," exhausted and documented and genuinely tried. He thought about Lily Potter's letter at the bottom of his trunk, which he had read more times this year than in any year before. The line near the end, "Whatever comes, Harry, you are more than what happened to you." He had read that line many times. It had landed differently each time, and this morning it landed most deeply of all. The exams happened, and Harry sat them with the focused calm of someone who had been studying since he was old enough to hold a book, and who had spent a year in classrooms that were, in his honest assessment, rigorous in some areas and less rigorous in others than what Obi-Wan had put him through. He did not feel guilty about this. He did his best work and let it be what it was. Hermione finished every exam with the expression of someone who knows they've done well and is already analyzing their margin for improvement. Ron finished most exams with the expression of someone who has done adequately and is making peace with adequacy, which was itself a kind of competence Harry respected. They sat the practicals together, and Harry performed his with a fluency that made Professor Flitwick, presiding over the charms practical, make a small involuntary sound. Again. Flitwick said, meaning, "Did you just do that on the first attempt?" "Sorry," Harry said. "Don't apologize," Flitwick said. "Do it again so I can see it properly." He did it again. Flitwick scribbled something in his notes with the barely suppressed energy of a professor encountering genuinely interesting work and pretending to be professionally measured about it. The last exam was on a Friday. When it was done, the school had the particular atmosphere of something released, the grounds filling with students in the last of the spring light, someone's exploding snap game going sideways near the greenhouses, the lake glittering in the early evening like it was pleased about something. Harry sat on the grass near the lake with Ron and Hermione, and they did nothing in particular for 2 hours, which was its own kind of extraordinary. Ron had managed to bring a chess set outside and was playing against himself in the idle way of someone who thinks in chess and can't fully turn it off. Hermione had a book but was reading in the slow way, reading and stopping and looking at the lake and reading again. Harry lay on his back with his arms behind his head and watched the first stars emerge and let the year settle into him the way good things settle, slowly and without rush. "Next year," Ron said. "Next year," Harry agreed. "It'll be different," Hermione said. "We'll know more. The castle will feel smaller." "Castles don't feel smaller," Ron said. "Not this one. Not spatially," Hermione said. She stopped. "I mean it won't be new anymore. It'll be ours." Harry looked at the sky. "Ours," she'd said. He turned the word over, feeling its weight. He thought about the thin place between worlds and the desert on the other side of it, and the stone hut and the morning meditations and the game where Obi-Wan said a planet, and he said everything he knew about it. He thought about the Tuscan drums at night, and Beru Lars at her kitchen table, and Owen Lars making the face. He thought about a small carved wooden toy, still at the bottom of his trunk, still doing its patient orbit in his memory. He thought about his mother's voice in the letter, "You are more than what happened to you," and he thought about a woman he had never met who had been so thoroughly present in everything he was that the distinction between her influence and his own character had become impossible to locate. He thought, "I have more homes than most people." He thought, "That's not a problem." On the last morning, before the Hogwarts Express, Obi-Wan found him at the top of the astronomy tower. Harry had come up before breakfast to meditate, which was his habit on important mornings. The high air, the early light, the school spread below him in the particular quiet of an hour before everyone was awake. He was sitting cross-legged on the stone with his eyes open, which was the version of meditation he preferred when there was something worth looking at, and the Scottish morning was worth looking at, the hills going blue and gold into the distance, and the sky cloudless in the way Scottish skies occasionally managed as though to prove they could. Obi-Wan sat down beside him without ceremony, and they were quiet together for a while the way they had been quiet together 10,000 mornings in the desert. "McGonagall wants to know," Obi-Wan said eventually, "if you'd consider doing advanced independent study over the summer. She's prepared a syllabus." "She gave you a syllabus." "She gave me a syllabus to give to you." A pause. "She also gave me her thoughts on your transfiguration technique, her assessment of your practical charms work, and a detailed comparison of your academic profile to 3 notable Gryffindors across the school's history." He considered. "She did not tell me who the 3 were, which I suspect was deliberate." Harry looked at the hills. "What do you think about the independent study?" "I think you should do it. I think Hogwarts is important in ways that I can supplement but not replace, and I think McGonagall is someone worth learning from." He paused. "I also think we have significant work of our own to do over the summer." The soul fragment, yes, he didn't soften it and Harry didn't want him to. "I spent 3 days in the Hogwarts library while you were in the hospital wing. There are directions worth pursuing. The medieval texts on soul anchoring and the interaction between magical and force-based life energy are, I have a beginning, not an answer, but a beginning. That's more than we had before." "Yes," another pause. "I want to be honest with you. This is the hardest problem I have encountered. The intersection of magic and the force at the level of the soul it's genuinely unknown territory. I don't know if what I find will lead where we want it to go, but you're going to try." "I am going to do everything I know how to do," Obi-Wan said, "and several things I'm going to have to invent, and I am not going to stop." He said it with the flat certainty of someone who had decided and did not require acknowledgement of the decision. "That is what I can promise you." Harry let that land. "I know," he said. Below them the castle was beginning to wake, a distant sound of movement, the first signs of the packing chaos that preceded the express. Somewhere out of sight, a ghost was moving through a wall, the Force briefly marking the oddness of it. Fox was singing in his tower, the long clear note carrying up through the morning air like something from a very old dream. "I want to go to Godric's Hollow," Harry said. Obi-Wan was quiet. "This summer, I want to go." He kept his eyes on the hills. "I've been ready for a while, I needed the year first. I needed to know enough of the rest of it before I stood in that place." He paused. "Does that make sense?" "Yes," Obi-Wan said. "Complete sense. I want to see where they lived. I want to see the house. I want to—" He stopped, found the word. "I want to be somewhere they were, in the actual place. Not just in the letter and the photograph and the things I know about them." "We'll go," Obi-Wan said. "Whenever you're ready." "Thank you for the photograph," Harry said. It was not a non sequitur. Obi-Wan felt the threat of it, the night in the ruined nursery, the photograph taken from the shelf, the act of someone who had crossed between worlds to retrieve a child and had thought to take something irreplaceable from the rubble. "You've never thanked me for that before," Obi-Wan said. "I didn't have the right words before." Obi-Wan was quiet for a moment. Below them, the express would be leaving in 4 hours, and there was packing to be done and goodbyes and the ordinary machinery of endings. None of it felt urgent. "There's something else you should know," Obi-Wan said, "about the soul fragment." Harry looked at him. "When you feel it," Obi-Wan paused, finding precision. "The note that doesn't belong. I want you to understand what it is and what it isn't. It is a piece of a broken thing that latched onto you because you were there, and because your mother's protection gave it nowhere else to go. It is not part of you. It has not shaped your character, your choices, or your love of people. It has not made you dark or compromised or lesser." He looked at Harry steadily. "I have known you since the night you were born. I have felt your Force presence every day of your life. That presence has never once carried Voldemort's signature. It carries yours, entirely yours." Harry held his gaze. "How do you know the difference?" "Because his signature is the absence of connection. His is the Force as something to be used, isolated, controlled. There is nothing isolated about you." He said it without adornment. "You are the most connected person I have ever known. You feel everything and everyone around you and you turn toward it rather than away. That is not Voldemort, that is Lily Potter's son." The morning held them for a moment. Fox sang his long note. The hills were blue and gold. "Right," Harry said, quietly, with the weight of something accepted. "Right," Obi-Wan agreed. The Hogwarts Express left at 11. The platform was full, the specific noise of 500 students loading trunks and arguing about compartments, and making the promises to write that some of them would actually keep. Harry found a compartment with Ron and Hermione and Neville, and a fifth-year girl named Tonks who had wandered in because she liked the look of the people in it, and who within 15 minutes had changed her hair 3 separate colors, and was explaining the theoretical basis of Metamorph Magus ability to Hermione with an enthusiasm that matched Hermione's own. The train pulled out of Hogsmeade Station and the castle receded through the window, the towers going small against the hills and then gone as the track curved. Harry watched it go. Dumbledore was on the platform as the train left. He had stood apart from the usual teacher contingent, and he had looked at Harry through the window as the train began to move, and what Harry had seen in his face in that brief, specific moment was not strategy and not chessboard thinking, and not the long-game patience of a century of difficult work. It was simpler than all of that. It was a man who had expected to be alone with an impossible problem, and had discovered, very late, that he wasn't. Harry had raised a hand. Dumbledore had inclined his head. The train had taken the curve and he was gone. "He'll be different next year," Hermione said, watching Harry watch the empty window. "Yes," Harry agreed. "Different is good. He was always trying to protect you," she said. "The analytical mode, but underneath it's something warmer. He just had a very strange idea of what protection required." "He had the idea," Harry said, "that protection meant keeping someone in the shape you needed them to be in, for their own sake and yours." He turned from the window. "It's a mistake a lot of people make with the people they love. They love the version they need rather than the version that actually exists." Hermione looked at him, then at Ron, who was setting up the chessboard, then back at Harry. "You're going to be completely insufferable by 7th year," she said. "I've been told," Harry said. Ron handed him the white pieces. "Your move." They arrived at King's Cross in the mid-afternoon. The families were waiting beyond the barrier, the Weasley parents in a cluster of red, visible from considerable distance, Hermione's parents looking slightly startled by the volume of everything, which was their standard expression upon collecting their daughter from this particular school, Neville's grandmother, upright and eagle-eyed, scanning the platform with the focus of a woman who expected things to go wrong and was prepared. And Obi-Wan, standing just past the barrier in his desert robes that were entirely impractical for a London summer and entirely unbothered by that fact, with his hands clasped loosely in front of him, and the Force moving through him in its particular patient way. He had come through separately, come ahead, and had apparently been standing there long enough that a small child near him had decided he was interesting, and was staring at him from behind its mother's leg, with the focused intensity of someone who has seen something unusual and is collecting data. Harry came through the barrier with his trunk and his owl, Hedwig, a gift from Ron's mother at Christmas, white and bright-eyed and opinionated, and Obi-Wan looked at him, and the year was in both of them, the full weight of everything that had happened in the 9 months between September and this platform, and neither of them needed to organize it into words. Ron came through behind Harry and stopped beside him and said, "That's him. That's him," Harry confirmed. Ron looked at Obi-Wan for a moment. Obi-Wan noticed, as he noticed everything, and looked back at Ron with the attention that made people feel seen. Ron stood a little straighter without appearing to know he was doing it. "You're the one who raised him," Ron said. It was half greeting and half statement of fact. "I am," Obi-Wan said. "He's brilliant," Ron said, "and occasionally completely strange." "Yes," Obi-Wan said, with the tone of someone who has known this for 11 years and finds it one of the better things about the situation. Ron looked satisfied. He went to find his family. Hermione came through next, books already in her arms, though the trunk was right behind her, and she stopped in front of Obi-Wan and said, "I've been doing research into the soul fragment problem. I have 17 possible directions and a preliminary methodology for testing each one. I'll send you the notes over the summer." Obi-Wan looked at her for a moment. "Thank you," he said. "I would genuinely welcome that." She nodded with the brisk efficiency she used when something had gone correctly and went to find her parents. Harry watched her go. He thought about 17 possible directions. He thought about Ron's chess and Neville's quiet, and Tonks's wildly variable hair, and McGonagall's toast-in-hand emphasis, and Flitwick's involuntary sound, and Dumbledore on the platform inclining his head. He thought about a school built in a mountain in Scotland that was stranger and older and more alive than anything he'd encountered, and how it had over 9 months become, not home exactly, because home was a stone hut and a desert sky and 2 suns setting, but something that deserved a word close to that. He thought about what came next, the Horcruxes. Voldemort regrouping somewhere, diminished but not gone, feeling the wand bond and the failure of this year, and the existence of a Harry Potter who was not what he'd expected. The soul fragment, requiring research and time, and the particular stubbornness of a Jedi Master who had decided something was solvable. Godric's Hollow, waiting for whenever Harry was ready, which he almost was. He thought about his mother's letter. "You are more than what happened to you." He thought about the Force, running through him in its river quality, constant and present, and the magic braided through it, and the wand in his holster, and the lightsaber at his hip, and the photograph in the bottom of his trunk, and the carved wooden toy still doing its orbit. "Ready," Obi-Wan said beside him. Harry picked up his trunk. Hedwig ruffled her feathers and settled. "Yes," he said. They walked out of King's Cross into the London afternoon, into the grey summer light and the noise and the specific smell of a city that had no idea what was walking through it, and the Force was bright around them both, and what came next was everything, and Harry Potter was not afraid of any of it.